Taking it now. We got people. Just wait to build up. All right, yeah, we're just waiting for people to show up, whoever that is. Once we get a couple, at least, we'll get going. It's only been about a minute. Usually takes a while. Oh, that would be my mom. Um, she passed away like around a month ago. Um, Probably about the night before or night after I recorded the lines for Sobek, so he knew what was going on, and then he kind of did that like without me even knowing he was planning on doing it. So uh, yeah, that's why that was in there. I think he did kind of the same thing with his dad on which which video was it? The one for in the woods somewhere. He devoted that one to his dad because he did that like right after he passed away. So I guess it's become some kind of like weird tradition, I guess. But yeah, that happened about a month ago. My mom passed away. So like the people on Patreon already know that because I was just telling them like kind of what that means and for like the uploads and stuff like that for a while. But yeah, that's what that meant. Yeah, it's been a rough month, uh, but that's kind of one of the things that I'll get into more lately is like she really wanted me to do something with the writing and stuff. So I decided I'm going to try and take it a bit more seriously and do more with it. So we're going to see how that goes. But like a lot of the constraints in time I had for writing had to do with I was her. I never can remember the term. Um, Primary caregiver, I think is the word, for years. And there were times I couldn't do much of anything because I had to be right there with her. Uh, where like she couldn't be by herself, so I had to be like at least the next room over, and didn't have time to do anything else. So, and I think that's kind of how me and Scott tended to bond so fast, as we were in the similar situations with like his dad having the same situation kind of as my mom, to where we were both like looking after one of our parents, and kind of understood what that was like and how weird that could be. So we kind of like had that quick bonding really quick over a short period of time and really understood each other. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons Scott did that, was he wanted to like, you know, do something, a small gesture like that, I guess. But yeah, that's why that was there. Was that happened about a month ago? So up to two. Yeah, yeah. Feel free. Just still waiting for people to show up. It normally takes a while for the full crowd to develop, and I only have like so many. Like I mean, for like an audience of like 100,000 people, you'll get like 100, 200 live stream followers. So I'm not expecting a lot of people. It's just whoever wants to show up and get ahead of the curve. So it's no big deal. Up to three. Post on the subreddit. That might help. My playlists are always up to date. If there's a video on it, uh, it's in my playlists. Scott's playlists are a different thing. I don't have any control over what Scott does with his on his channel. Um, but mine are, as soon as a new video's there, it's on the playlist exactly where it needs to be. And there's several of them. So if there's a video up on one of those two channels, on Dr. Creepin's or Nature's Temper, with one of my stories in it, it's on that channel, or it's on this channel in the right playlist, like exactly where it needs to be. Yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing this to talk about, is the like whenever somebody has a question or something, because there's so many different things to it. If I'm just given free reign, I'll ramble on forever, and it might not be about what people want to uh, necessarily hear. Like, I teach seminars in real life, like not on writing, but like martial arts and crap like that. And a lot of the time, I tell people that asking questions will tend to drive the whole thing along a lot better, because now I know what is most beneficial to people. So that's where I tend to focus, is the question, and then we'll go with that. And somebody will ask another question, I'll go with that. So that's why these tend to be like a better way to do that, um, because it gives a more personal thing to each question, and I can kind of go off the cuff. Um, but that tends to be the benefit to these, is people ask a question and then you can kind of march on in that direction for a little while, uh, and then that can lead down a different avenue here and a different avenue there. By some chance, you end up covering something that wasn't expected or that they might not have thought of, and the randomness of it tends to help a lot, as opposed to just like writing out, here's how you do this one thing, and maybe nobody cares. So they can like ask directly, like, well, hey, well, how do I do this, or what's the reason for that, or what's your thought process here, and that will tend to help a lot better. I don't know. You do this a lot. You'll hear the stupid questions. I can promise you that. Uh, I've seen it a lot. It's, it, I define like stupid questions as something where the answer is like axiomatic, to where there was no need for the question to begin with. And it's like, well, if you had been paying attention, there wouldn't have been a need for the question, but you didn't. And now here we are, you asking the question. But like, if it's like a genuine inquiry, like, hey, how do you do this? I'm genuinely interested. That, I think that's where that thing really applies, is actually attempting to increase your knowledge or better your understanding. That's where you're not asking stupid questions. You're sincerely seeking knowledge, as opposed to like just some random thing that you probably should have known better anyways. Uh, yeah, the internet very quickly broke me of saying there are no stupid questions, uh, because the it'll quickly dissolve any kind of maxim or saying or adage like that. If you're exposed to enough people for a long enough period of time, they'll find the stupid questions, I promise. But like the genuine inquiries, I don't think there's any such thing as a stupid, like, sincere inquiry when somebody wants to know something for like legitimate reasons, and they're saying, I don't know this and I would like to. Yeah, no, I don't think that's ever stupid. I think that's one of the smartest things you can do, is ask sincere questions, uh, to better your understanding. Is like, that's one of the first things that I'm always the person to do. I don't know this and I need to understand it better. Yeah. But that tends to be um, one of the better things to do to learn is to figure out what we don't know, and then that's how you know how to improve. Because like when I started writing, I came into this um, no formal writing, biggest training, tutelage, whatever. It was trial and error over years and years and years of stuff that will never see the light of day. Because I look at it and go, I don't like that. That's stupid. I could have done better. Or what do I like about this certain story that makes me like it, or what about this certain story makes me enjoy it so much, uh, and what about this story made me not like it? And then I kind of looked at those, and I only really started to analyze, write, and learn different things about writing after people kept asking me uh, to tell them, well, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? Or what's and I'm like, I don't know. I just kind of write what I like, and then other people sometimes like it. Uh, so then I started to like break down and like learn what I do and how I do it. Like I had to like analyze my own stuff and figure out what was going on and how to answer those questions. Just because a lot of the time I had, I don't know as my default answer. Like I can't tell you. It's just something I do, and then sometimes people like it, and that started to bug me. Like I didn't like having that gap in knowledge. It's like I don't. It's just I don't know, and then so I wanted to be able to explain it. So I started figuring it out and breaking it down and learning, well, what's this? And well, what's that method? Or what does this compare to in famous literature? Who does this? And, over the past 5 years, I think it's been 5 years. 20, yeah, it's been about 5 years uh, since I started doing these online stories and people asking me about that stuff. Because that was one of the last things I ever expected was, you know, people coming to me and go, hey, how do you do this? Or what's your ideas with that? Or the weirdest things are people asking me, well, hey, can I send you this thing? And then you read it and tell me what you think. And that's the one I've always been weirdest about is like, I tell people I will, but you have to go and watch the bird scene from Victorious first. And once you understand that, then I might look it over because that's like a really good idea of like why it can be a slippery slope to start writing or doing anything creative based only on what other people think, and that drives me crazy. Not typically. There might be things that I'll feel a certain way about as I like proofread back through it. Um, because generally I tend to plot it out a lot in my head first. Um, because I tell people I like to start from the end and then get from the beginning to the end, so that kind of guides uh, the nature of everything that happens. Um, but for the most part, the stuff that people tend to like the most is the stuff that happens at random points in between the major events, the small interactions, the character driven stuff where the personalities dictate what happens more than the major events or plot devices and things like that. Because that makes up the bulk of any story, really, is the human interaction or human paranormal interaction in this case. But not typically. I've done a little bit more of that with this season of Cerber because I've had more time to write it. I wrote it all out first instead of putting out the first part and then trying to play catch up like I did the other two seasons, which is just a miserable thing to do. And it's nerve wracking. It drives me crazy. So I wanted to like really plot this out, and it wasn't necessarily like, well, I just don't like that entirely. I would change it. Uh, yes, but that's a nightmare of itself because it's years and years of watching movies and spotting plot holes, or reading books and spotting plot holes, and it just driving me absolutely crazy. And also, I tell people years and years of being by myself and living in my own head, building my own worlds. So everything's informed by these rules that exist, that, I already know the set of rules. So if they're in violation of that, then it doesn't happen. Uh, and like I said, starting from the end and then moving forward is a major part of how you avoid that. If you know how something ends and everything has to lead up to that, it funnels out and sifts through all of the stuff that would violate that. So you don't tend to get lost in just this random act of creation all the time, to where you come up with something that completely violates something else. And also, it comes from just thinking about it constantly over time. Like when I'm riding, if I'm in the gym, if I'm doing some mindless task, that will tend to be where my mind goes, and just think about that and cycle through it and go and plot out how these different things fit together. And like I said, once you have that plus that base level of understanding of what the rules are and what can be what can't be violated under any conditions, really does help that. Um, and that's kind of the core component of world building, is something that can't be violated. It has to be consistent. Like, that's your world, that's your universe. Everything has to abide by those rules, and everything you do has an effect on everything that you've done prior to that. It has to fit. So that's why I don't tend to do anything or add anything new without understanding what those consequences are going to be to everything else. And that's what I look for a lot when I'm proofreading too. Is the continuity? Is like, does this conflict with anything? Um, yes. Examples. So, like the order of things. Uh, like, it has to be that the paranormal community is hidden. Like, I want the world that these people live in to function very similarly to how ours does. So we start looking at, okay, let's look at our world. If the paranormal exists, why don't I see them? Why don't I encounter them? So everything in that world has to revolve around the fact that this world has to stay hidden under any circumstance. Like, that's one of the chief goals. So when you have a business that involves regular people interacting with paranormal, or you have a large portion of the paranormal, like vampires running around, it has to fit into that. So if there were vampires in this real world, why don't we see bodies drained of blood all over the place? Or why don't we see whatever we might see? So that dictates how those vampires in that world have to be. It dictates how the business, like Cerber, has to run. Why don't we see these things running around? Why don't we interact with them? So now we have paranormal exclusive housing. We have, uh, institutional programs that essentially bribe them with money to stay out of uh, the public eye. Different things like that. So these are things that, like, remain consistent. That, like, can't be broken or violated without an extremely good in-world reason. So you have that kind of drives it. So you can't just do some random crap with Cerber that would violate that. Of the no, not of the worst verse. So season 3 is, it's end of the road. So it's the last season for I Ride for Cerber. It's the same as, like, the last part of Werewolves Are Assholes or Worst Hotel. they all end on the same point. Like this one in I Ride for Cerber is going to end exactly the same place where Werewolves Are Assholes and Worst Hotel did. And that's where they all come together, and there's going to be this last arc of that story that comes together, and that's going to be that last major arc. And then there's going to be 3 series that take those series place. We've got what are the working titles now? Is We Deal in Dreams, Tales of Haley Handiwork, and Where Monsters Play, which are the 3 that are being set up right now. So they're going to have those series that take over, and they're going to have a different plot and a different direction that they go. So that's going to be the next cycle of stories after the what I call the cursed object arc, where that's all been funneling to that direction. So that's the last series of the first set of worst first stories ending. Then it moves on from there. Let's see, do little details go a long way for characters? But little details depends on the detail. Like a small tick or a weird habit can, if you reinforce it over and over and over again. Like the character behind that dictate, like the personality behind the character dictates what they do. So if it's a small like personality quirk or something, it depends on how you use it. Somebody twiddling their fingers or twirling their hair when they're nervous can be a huge signal that something's going on. Uh, but it depends on how you reinforce that over the course of a story. If you do it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, in certain situations where things are kind of very anxious and nervous and tense, and then you can use that as a signal for something, then yeah, it can be a huge difference. But like building long character sheets and stuff can really get in the way of the story if you don't really understand why your character does certain things or little details in your character's past. Um, Protagonists from Werewolves Are Assholes, good example, is that's one of the main things is well, why is a character lesbian or whatever, even though they made that conclusion before it realized she was bisexual. But anyways, that's a huge part of her character. Like that builds on how she approaches the world, why she's so defensive, why she has that big chip on her shoulder all the time, why she's so snappy, how she met the friends she has at that point. Like that informs so much of her character. And that's why that tends to be important in the story. That can be Jose when you really get an idea of his past, and Travis, um, which will make more sense kind of as you go through this last season of Cerber. Is those little things, those little ticks, how the character's past affects what they do is a big part of it. So it depends on what exact thing you're talking about when you say little, because it can be little but significant, and it can also be a big thing that's a huge part of their character or their personality that never really gets touched on again. So it's how you use it versus how big or small it is. That's what she said. But yeah, that tends to be the more important factor is how you use a given detail about that character rather than how big or small that aspect is. Because I mean, like you can have a black character, and that's something very big. That's a very visual thing. It can inform their culture, their appearance, all kinds of things. But if you never use it, then it doesn't really matter. But you can have a character with a scar on their hand or something, and that can be something that you repeatedly touch on that becomes a more significant part of the story later on. So it's all depending on how you use those tiny aspects that can make them more significant. So they can or they can't be depending on how you're willing to use them. Like I said, there's no real rules. It's how you approach that aspect of the character. Oh, yeah, that's the whole private investigator thing and what rights do paranormals have is kind of something that I've been doing with the Cerber series, like that's kind of the thing I wanted to touch on when I started doing it, is like how they're actually being treated. Because when I listened to the original Cerber series, I was like, wow, that's like the most exploitive thing I've ever seen. And like Mofucius, to her credit, doesn't really go very far towards making Adeline a protagonist or a good character. Like she's not a hero of the story. She's a businesswoman. Like that's her character. And I wanted to touch more on that. I didn't want to do this like budding friendship thing because that's already her and Jim. Like she likes Jim despite not liking most other men. So I wanted to go with that and keep that part of her character true in Cerber is she doesn't like men. Jose's a man, and Jose can rub her the wrong way better than just about anyone. So I wanted to kind of show like she's not the hero of the story. She's not this, benevolent, good billionaire or whatever you want to call it. And like really kind of show uh, like the two sides. You have like Medusa, Adeline, trying to wring every single cent she can out of the paranormal community, and then you have Sobek coming in, which he's trying to revert that and give them ways to where they can become self-sufficient, like away from the government, not have to spend ludicrous amounts of money on the basic needs for survival. So they have to live in squalor and these weird, dilapidated buildings and stuff like that. And you see that kind of you see less of him, but you see more of his influence through it. Because I tended to try to write him out of it a little bit because there's going to be more of him later on in the series, and I do the voice, so I didn't want Scott to have to constantly go through and have to edit all that in. Uh, so we've got his liaison that you see in that part of Dirty Work Inc. Uh, but that tends to be where you see him act through a lot of this. But you see him more in these comics in Where Monsters Play. That's the one about the theme park, the water park that they visit. Um, it circles around that. Uh, so that's kind of where you get to see more of what he does as far as him trying to build up the paranormal community. And Jose's a part of that. Like Jose's not gone. Like this, you see these characters again as the story progresses, but uh, it's shifted. The focus is shifted on these new characters that come in and kind of pick up the torch, so that they're different. It's a different story from a different perspective, things like that. You One of the things I tend to do is base them to some degree on people I know who I've interacted with a lot in my life. Some a lot more than others. Like some are exactly people I know in real life. Gay Jake, Tony, uh, Ryan, Harley. I mean, like those are people who I know personally or have known, and kind of build characters off of them. So I can think, well, what would they do in this situation? How would they react? But also just people I watch, people I know, um, or just like how I would feel in a certain situation, because we don't always tend to react to the same things the same way. Like we'll react to the same thing two different ways on two different days, completely differently. Um, so it can be completely like by just a whim how I choose to go with the character, like, and then see how that progresses, how I have to go from that and get these characters to navigate that social situation. And that's part of what makes it fun. Is like it's more like watching these things unfold and then writing down what you see in your head, um, as opposed to trying to like make something up as you go. I tend to like imagine these interactions and then kind of write down what I saw. But um, having so many of those characters really helps. It really helps to have them based on something that's very vivid in your memory. Um, like you think of like Rissa, and you just think, well, okay, well, where does she come from? Uh, what's her history? What's her personality? And then you use those basic things, and that just kind of carries you through. But it's like I said earlier, the more you think of it, like legitimately think of it and think of their past and how they do, then it becomes easier to remember. Because that's how you become familiar with anything, is the more you revisit that information, the more it becomes ingrained. Like that's kind of the trick to anything, is you can't just like read a history book and then you know history. It's how many times you go back through it, um, and then you become familiar with it and becomes a regular part of your memory. It moves from short term to long term. So you come up with the character, and the more you write the character, the more familiar you are, because the more you're thinking about that character and what they do and how they do it and their past and their personality and things like that. So the more that you think of it, the better you remember it, and it becomes a lot easier over time. I mean, to this day, I don't have a spreadsheet or anything like that of any of these characters. None of this exists on paper. It's just being familiar with those core things of their personality, and it's the fact that I think about it a lot. Like I've been editing and formatting this stuff uh, for a different thing that I'll bring up in a little while. But going through, I've realized recently how much I've written over the past 5 years, and that's what goes into making them so easily familiar. Is I've just thought about them that much, uh, and generally with characters like that, I don't tend to focus on tiny things so much, as I kind of let the uh, listener's imagination kind of fill in a lot of the stuff that they're doing instead of being hyper specific. But yeah, it's just the more you think about them, the better you understand them and the better you remember them. So you don't have to sit there and try and dig through a bunch of stuff. Is the more you visit these little worlds you create, the easier it is. As opposed to trying to reinvent a new world and a new cast of characters every single time you write something. Uh, Tips on writing fights. Um, First, don't write a lot of them. Uh, when it comes to writing fights, yeah, don't write a lot of them. More important than the fight itself is the suspense you build up to it, the emotional content, as Bruce Lee would say. Um, what that fight means, really. It, and just like I was just saying with the characters, the more detail you try to go into, the less you're going to get out of it. Because writing, it's harder to keep a rhythm in pure text. That's a fundamental limitation. You can write anything you want. There's no restrictions. But if you want that to have an impact and to flow, then you have to make concessions. Literature is hijacking the reader's imagination. You have to know what certain things are going to do as far as what they're going to think. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to not tell them what to think, is to let their mind take over. It's the same thing with horror, basically, is they're going to put the scariest version of that unseen monster in their head, just like they're going to put their coolest version of that unseen fight in their head. Like with, what's a good example? Okay, so like in the first season of Dirty Working, the first episode or first part, um, the thing with Han Lao and the vampires, you don't see that. You just see the aftermath. So then your head's going to try and fill that in with the coolest possible version of how that all went down. I didn't have to describe it. I just had to describe what Louis was outside experiencing and then what he saw after the fact. And then everything else got filled in. So sometimes the best thing to do is to not try and write it, but if you have to, like with Travis and Fort, then broad strokes will tend to help. More what he's thinking, how he's trying to strategize around it, rather than trying to hyper focus in on small things. And I have to go extra hard to do that because I want to. Like I have an inclination to, like having the martial arts and all that background. I want to talk about, foot placement and how to put your hip into something, how to do momentum generation or efficiency, accuracy, targeting. I would love to, but at the same time, that hurts the fight. Like, it's easy to want to go, oh, this is how much I know about fighting. Most people don't care. That hurts the story. So I ignore a bunch of that and just go for the broad strokes that uh, tend to get the best done. And I tend to say that across a lot of things. Like, for a good example, one of the first things, like when I'm listening to a creepypasta, one of the first things that will turn me off of it and make me click to another one is somebody who you can do. It's like describing guns. Like there's a firearms and munition manufacturer in my family. Like my family owns weapons and munitions manufacturer. I know a lot about guns, and I still hate listening to stories where one of the first things is somebody describing what kind of gun, what kind of pistol, and rifles they had. It drives me because that tells me how the rest of the story is going to be. So I'll just immediately just lose interest and go somewhere else because that kind of just raw exposition just really doesn't do much for a flow of the story and creating drama and suspense and this interpersonal character dynamic. Like there's no real excitement there. That's just something that the writer's doing for themselves to show what they know about that topic, but it doesn't add to the story in any real significant way. So you have to pick what you focus in on. Like with fights, the broad strokes will get it done a lot better than trying to hyperfixate on the small details, because most people don't care about that stuff. They want the tension behind it, the drama, the interplay between these characters and what that means for the story and how this moves the story along. So I won't do that typically unless there's some good reason. Like I said, with the Travis and Vort fight, it's showing that he's learned how to do this. Like that he has a sense of strategy and tactics, and that he can handle himself now. He's not just some wimpy guy who owes a lot of money in debt, who's always running for his life. But after that, you don't really see much serious, like, one-to-one action and stuff like that. So it tends to be the broader strokes will work better with things like that, and you let the imagination fill in the rest, and that will keep a better rhythm and keep the tensions high and the drama going a lot better than trying to hyper focus in on the tiny little details that most people typically won't care about. Because while it might matter to you or might matter to me, most people aren't going to care. Writing assassinations. Writing assassinations. It depends. The more you know about it, the better it will sound. As bad as that sounds, uh, like how assassinations happen is a wide spectrum of stuff, because there are good assassins and there are bad assassins. The bad assassins are the ones you hear about, that you'll see their faces and things like that. So, however, and the perspective from which the assassination occurs, whether the perspective is from the person doing the assassination or from somebody witnessing it, uh, is going to affect the information flow that you get from that. But typically, I would say when it comes to assassinations, is first, like, you know, even if the audience, the readers, don't know the reason, it's good for you to know the reason to understand why that's happening, but also to approach it practically. Like, if you want to get away with this, what would you do? A good resource uh, that I recommend everybody follow, not just for this particular thing, but everything, is Ed Calderon. Uh, the Manifesto podcast, Ed's Manifesto, however you find him, has a lot of information on things like that, like urban movement, criminology, weaponology, evasive tactics, anything you can think of, pretty much. So if you follow resources like that, you can learn a lot without having to go through your own firsthand experiences, which can be remarkably traumatizing in any kind of field that you would even encounter assassinations. Uh, so you find people who have been in that, like I said, like Ed Calderon, and listen to what he has to say very closely, and you can learn a lot from that, which can inform your writing. Like it's common convention that Sicario, the movie series Sicario, was largely referenced or uh, largely referenced Ed Calderon's work and the information that he conveys to inform what was going on in that movie. So, yeah, if you want to really get behind the mind of an assassin or criminal or anything like that, that's something I recommend. Is And not just that, he has courses you can take. He has like real courses you can attend where you learn this stuff if you ever get a chance. But yeah, Ed Calderon. If you can't remember the name later on, just come back to this. It'll probably be recorded on my channel, and go to this part. It's like 46 minutes, 45, 46 minutes. Ed Calderon, Ed's Manifesto, Manifesto podcast, any of those things will lead you to him. And you can look that up, and that will really help you get an idea of how to write an assassin, basically, from a practical perspective. Uh, yeah. Well, yeah. That's part of making complexity in characters, is not losing the human element. Because Travis has been this kind of he's been on the run most of his life. He's always been in trouble. He's always been looking over his shoulder. Like, you can give somebody a gun, but that's not gonna, you know, get that person off, that's always lurking in the shadows, out of their mind. He's always, you know, looking for that guy who's out to break his leg, or the next person he owes money to. And he's in that mindset. Like, he can fight, but that doesn't change the fact that he doesn't want to fight. Like, and that's a real thing. Most people who know how to fight are the people who really don't want to fight. Um, and with Jose is alive because he's got that paranoia to him, but he's also, like I said, once you understand his history a little bit better, which you'll get hints of it and how to track that down in this last season, you understand that even though they're twins, they had different experiences in life that inform ultimately their character arc, and how they approach things. Um, so with Travis, he's always been in trouble. He's always had people after him that are out for him individually. So that's how he thinks: is somebody's always out to get me. And then you have Jose, who is more paranoid from what he's done. Like, he rides a bicycle. And as somebody who does that, I can see where he's coming from with that, is because you see how bad things can go in the blink of an eye. You can go from just, this state of not caring, not worrying about anything, to having a 3,000-pound machine parked on top of you in an instant. So he's going off of that. He's always thinking that things are going to go from good to bad in a split second. So he's always looking out for that. He's always paying attention. But he's a more empathetic, compassionate person, more or less, than Travis tends to be. So he can understand that can happen for other people. Like I said, being a New York bike messenger, you're going to have friends that get eaten by trucks and cars all the time. And so he's going to see that and, have that, a more extroverted perspective of what happens to other people rather than Travis, who's always been trying to, look out for himself and, avoid the consequences of his own actions. Jose is worried about, I might get home at the end of the day and another one of my friends has been ran over by a truck and I'm never going to see him again. Uh, so you get those two different perspectives in essentially the same person. Yeah, no problem. That's what this is all about. We've got four people here already, so uh, typically that's about 50 minutes in. That's about it. But yeah, I have things that are coming down the pipe. Like one of the things I'm doing is like I said earlier on, is I'm working on making this a more regular thing, being more serious about it. Uh, to do that, it has to, you know, pay some bills to some extent. I've got a few patrons now, and I tell people at the very least, I've got enough to where I don't have to worry about a cell phone bill anymore. Like at the beginning of every month, I know that Patreon is going to take care of my cell phone bill. So I want to start paying more attention to that and doing more things. So just not too long ago, I got the first sample for one of these, and this is the Spanish dollar that Hook gives to every member of his crew. So I found a guy in Spain, like these come from Spain, who makes very nice replicas of these. And we're doing a thing now on the Patreon where like all the different tiers have like worst first relevant names. And if somebody's in the Hooks crew tier for so long, then they get a coin in the mail and a letter from Hook, quote unquote Hook. And that's, one of the things I'm doing on there now is being more attentive to the Patreon since there's actual people on there now. And that's what's going to keep me more than anything being able to write frequently and regularly. And I'm also like I post some of the better art and stuff I do on there. But yeah, so I just got the first sample, so we're going to be doing that here soon. There's I'm going to post pictures. Like I said, this is just a preliminary thing. I'm going to post a regular thing on the Reddit later on, so you can actually see this because my webcam's horrible. It's just built into a cheap HP laptop. But yeah, it's the same coin that Hook gives to all his crew members. So we're going to be doing that. But then another thing. Oh yeah. If you're like, you will be surprised how much support you'll get. Generally, the negative feedback you'll get is from people who don't write and who cares what they have to say. Um, because for the most part, any writer just wants to see you writing. Like that's the most important part is write, do something, put it out there, and that will be a motivating force because you're like, well, I put that out there, it's out there now. Now I want to do even better, um, and just keep going that way. Uh, and it'll kind of motivate you if you think people are going to see it because I try not to get in that mindset, but like I said, I've got who knows how many stories that will never see the light of day before I ever started posting worst first stuff, and it was mostly like murder mystery stuff, thriller kind of things. And then I really wanted to start doing horror once I kind of understood how I wanted to write it and do a mixture of horror and comedy. But once I started posting them, it became a slightly more serious thing. It's like, well, now people see this. So I wanted to make sure that I was doing the best that I could and then do better next time and then better after that. And you just kind of keep, and then after a while, it's just, you don't even think about it. You just, you know, write and post and move on to the next thing. But as long as you're writing for you personally, that's the most important thing. Is because the therapeutic aspects of having your own world where you can go into and write and have a little bit of control from, in this weird, crazy world where we can't control much of anything is crazy therapeutic. And even if nobody ever sees it, that's all that matters, is that you get a benefit from it. But it also helps if you want people to give you feedback, to be able to post it to the people who matter, who you want feedback from, and say, hey, look at this, what would you do with this? And that's a world of benefit just on its own, is to be able to show people whose opinion you actually value and ask them for whatever guidance they can give you at the time. But yeah, just having that, and it's I would say it shouldn't be so much about confidence as a lack of worrying about what other people actually think about it. Will go a lot longer. Is this was for me? If you like it, that's great. If not, I'm still going to write. And now, hey Reese. Oh, I, I'm the biggest force in the Rule 34 department right now. If you're not on the Discord, it exists. But I did a what is the NSF Worst Verse uh, channel on there, where I do some of the more spicy, not safe for work art. But there's barely any, like, well, I still hate to use the word fan, but fan art. I know easy, but that's like you need a huge following for that, which is just not something that I think I have. I have this little humble thing on Reddit for the most part, and then however many like the people who generally consume this on YouTube barely know I exist for the most part. The people who actually care about that kind of stuff are going to be on the Reddit, and there's you know I think like 1,050 maybe compared to the tens of thousands who actually listen to it on YouTube. But yeah. There's not many people on it. I know there's probably like 20 or something people on it. Uh, it's linked somewhere. If you can't find it on the Worst First subreddit, it'll be in my old posts on my profile. You can, if you scroll down far enough, you'll run into it. Or I might try and link it to my uh, profile on Reddit if I can. But yeah, it's there. It's just it's that funnel that you have people who go from YouTube to the Reddit, and then you direct them from the Reddit to the Discord, and every time you get a smaller chunk. So there is a Discord. I made it because people ask, but um, that tends to be the smallest portion of the Worst Verse following is on the Discord, but it's there. It exists, and there's a few different channels. There's the basic ones, and there's the art, and there's the NSFW thing. But that's that's a thing. It exists. There's, like I said, there's a few people on there, uh, and you can find it. Like, I think it's like, so you just have to doom scroll through the Reddit to find it. Reese, Reese, thank you. Oh, my cat's being ridiculous. Um, but yeah, it's there. And if you're looking for the Rule 34 type stuff, that's where it'll typically be, is in the NSFW channel on the Discord, where I post some of that kind of art whenever the compulsion hits me. But yeah, so it's on the Reddit, but I'll try and link it to my profile so it'll be easier to find. I just don't think about it much. because there's not many people there. But okay, yeah. Next thing, where is it? There it is. So the next biggish announcement is I think yesterday I got the first sample copy of the Winter Camp book. So like so you can't. It's a dark cover and my camera sucks, but you can kind of see it. Uh, so that's going to be available here soon after I, iron some things out. But you're going to be able to actually get a hard copy Wars First book, which is going to be relevant to the the coming season of Cerber. Uh, Almost like a backstory leading up to it. Um, so it's going to be important in that regard. It's not going to be vital to the story. It'll come up in the season, but it's not vital information. But the whole history behind that is there was a publishing company, like a little startup publishing company, who was doing an open submissions call, and they announced it in like February, and the deadline was in the middle of April. So they made the announcement middle of February and middle of April, and then I got a weird feeling from the company, like just busted my ass to finish it, and then by the time it was finished and submitted, the company gave me bad vibes, so I pulled the submission. It's like, no, never mind, take it out. But I went through the trouble. I did the cover art, so it's like, well, I can do this. Like, I have to learn how to format it and do all this crap. But I went through it and I did it, and it's gonna be available at some point. Okay, so the vampire question. I get the vampire question a lot. Is it's there are similarities um, to like where they come from. Like you'll figure that out in that last arc when everything comes together. But it's in the worst first vampire isn't like a taxonomic clade. It's just a rough descriptor of basically what they do. Um, so like the like you call them the common vampire is typically the result of somebody trying to make artificial orichalcum in some way, and that never works, and you end up getting vampires from it because they're the result of a very like a paranormal version of organometallic chemistry, like Dr. Jekyll explains in uh, the end of Werewolves Are Assholes. Like it's centered around organometallic chemistry. There's these little particles that invade the systems of the cells and start altering the, you know, biological chemistry of the system. And that's what constitutes those vampires. And then conversely, you only have the only real instances you get of the other type of vampire, the Strigoi, is the reason he calls himself that is because he's not sure what he is. He doesn't have any frame of reference for it. So he looks through stuff and says, well, this is the closest thing I can find. This must be it. So he uses that to describe himself, either for lack of better options, for brevity's sake. And that's just what he can think of to have some kind of description to make it easier for people to kind of understand what he is, what he does, what he's about. But that's the only real case you see of that in the Wars verse is Dracula and his daughters are very much a thing of their own. There's nothing else like them in the Wars verse, so they're unique in that sense. They're the only ones you see like that, and that ties in again to being very significant in this coming season of Cerber. Is them? They are a central fixture in this. They're the key aspect of the story, basically. Any reason? Yeah, that's what happened with that thing. It wasn't necessarily a contest. They were going to pick whichever ones they liked out of it. But yeah, the publishing company just like they were doing like making weird political rants on their professional business page and stuff like that. And I just the way that their email communication was, and I caught them kind of stretching the truth in their emails, and just decided I wasn't going to get in with another sketchy company like I did with the Schrade stuff. So um, I just it felt like cutting off an arm because I put a lot of work into it in a very short amount of time. And like that last week before the deadline, I think I barely slept because I had to do a bunch of writing, proofreading, editing, doing the art, and still had 2 days left over before it had to go in. And I was just like, no, just take it out. I don't want to do this. I changed my mind. But then I decided there's this channel I watch on YouTube called Logic, and he has this regular fixture, Armando Calvo, and he's this idiot of an apologist. And I just thought, if he can figure out how to publish a book on his own, there's no reason I can't do it. Like, you can be motivated by greatness, but you can also be motivated by stupidity, I guess. But I figured if he can do it, there's no excuse that I shouldn't be able to figure this out. So I looked at the publishing site and like how to do it and what they do and what they offer you to be able to figure it out, and just kind of put my nose to the grindstone and started figuring it out. And now I've got that one almost ready, and I'm gonna try and do that with the rest of them because everybody is asking me for years about hard copy. So I'm gonna have hopefully stuff for Werewolves Are Assholes. I'm gonna have a separate volume for Worst Hotel, a separate volume for Cerber, a separate volume for the side stories. Um, so, like I said, I don't plan on making a lot of money off this, but it's going to be there for people who want it, so they can finally have those hard copies and have a tangible volume of whatever their favorite story is, or they can have them all or whatever. And I could do special editions like with this. At a certain point, I'm going to do a special edition cover based on a particular classic monster novel. Uh, so just doing stuff like that to keep it interesting. But yeah, I had to back out of that one and just do what I thought was best for me at the time. I just yeah, it was very very sketchy the way they were conducting themselves publicly, and I had to back out of that one and try it myself. Not at recreating the hotel. The whole tomb thing was, and again, tomb is just a slang term, I guess, like making fun of Tomb Raider, but it was essentially an underground city. It was more recreating Atlantis than recreating the hotel, because that's a lot harder to do. There is a recreation, a loose recreation of the hotel in the story. You guys have seen it already, even if you don't recognize it. But uh, that typically, no. The reason it was underground is because like they were hiding from the hotel. They had that metal, they had that orichalcum, and they weren't supposed to. So you don't want to be above ground showing that off. So they built it underground, and that's the only reason that lineage of vampire didn't escape and didn't mix in with the others, is because it was sealed off underground. So you didn't get the you know dissemination of them through the population like you did with the Atlantis incident. So that's why that didn't happen. So like there's uh, three different uh, lineages of those uh, in the Wars first, three different lineages of those vampires. You have the Atlantean, you have the Peruvian in the Peruvian underground city, and then you have what's going to be featured in Magenta Valley, which is essentially the same lineage as the Peruvian ones. Once you understand how those uh, kind of come to be, how that process happens, which is set up. Actually, that was the whole point of We Raided the Wrong Tomb, was setting up and leading over into Magenta Valley. So that's I have this weird obsession with foreshadowing things, and that's largely what uh, a purpose of We Raided the Wrong Tomb is it. The main purpose of the story is to demonstrate that people are telling these stories from a first person perspective, and that you shouldn't take everything for granted, because the bulk of that story, like within, not like it's a fictional story, like I wrote it, but within the confines of the Wordverse, most of that story isn't true the way it's told by Rebecca Thorborough in that story. The recounting you get of that story is not what actually happened. So you're going to get like a more accurate recounting of events in Magenta Valley because it set that up. But what happened in that story largely didn't happen the way she told it to you. Uh, a lot of that story, as she tells it, is a lie. It's something she made up, and you find out why, and what it was, what she changed, and stuff like in Magenta Valley, as it changes over into that. But yeah, that's largely the purpose of Magenta Valley is to continue through what happened there and to explore the first generation of a new, you know, series of vampires and what actually happens when you have this process that makes them, like where they come from, what happens, things like that. Probably not. That, like I said, that's a full novel length thing. It depends. I'm talking with him now about doing an audiobook for this, like me actually hiring him to do an audiobook, because he's working on an audiobook for somebody right now, and it's long. Like this is like 23,000 words. It's a novella. It's not a novel. But Magenta Valley is a full length novel. So I might, um, like I said, depending on once I, now that I'm getting serious, how much income doing this generates, uh, I might get him to do an audiobook version of Magenta Valley that you guys can get. Because I don't want anybody else narrating these stories. Like once Scott started doing it, I knew that was it. That was the way I wanted these stories narrated. Um, so yeah, I would very much like to. I'll even if since you asked, even if I don't make enough money doing this to be able to just pay him direct, I'll do like a what's this, like a GoFundMe, whatever it's called, um, to give you guys a chance to like finance that, to where I can uh, hire him to make an audiobook of it. But I want to do more than just that. Like part of my whole thing is, uh, like I said, we're going to be plugging the Patreon. He's already agreed. Like he'll plug my Patreon in each new story so that it can direct more people that way. Because for the most part, I haven't been making a big deal of it. I've just, like, when people ask, I say, "Oh well, here you go. That's where it is." So I haven't been plugging, and I've got enough people on there right now that I have reason to believe I can do something with that. Uh, so I want to build that up, and hopefully the goal is I want to be able to pay him to narrate the worst first stories so that he immediately makes his money back on it, which means he can turn off ads on the videos, which makes that whole, for every worst first story, that will be a seamless listen through. Uh, if you want to use the regular YouTube app and you don't want to use like a third party app or something to block ads, you can just listen through it ad free if I am able to make enough off of this to do that through Patreon. And like I said, it's me thinking about how to make the whole experience better, and that's one of the ways that I came up with is if I can pay him directly, like as hiring him to narrate these stories, then he can turn off ads, and then the listening experience becomes a lot more clean and fluid, and you don't have that interruption, in the middle of a climactic event. So, it motivates people to do that. Yeah. Well, he had that part. Like it wasn't so much like I don't want to take undeserved credit because he had that part for the entire time. Like I didn't just send it to him later on. Like whatever that gap was between the part that he narrated last and then this most recent one, he had it that entire time. Uh, he broke that up. That was all one piece. The story was all sent to him together. Uh, he had access to it the entire time, and then he broke that story in half, and then just never got back to that part of the story. Um, and that's just when he decided to narrate it. It wasn't when I sent it to him. So that was entirely like Scott finished it before him because he narrated through that entire series in the time it took for Dr. Creepin to get from that part to the next that he separated himself. So that's not like me being benevolent. Like he already had it. So that like I'm not going to take credit where it's undeserved. He had that part, and that's just how long it took for him to narrate it. It wasn't like me handing it back to him, going, "Well, here we've been." He's had it. So like yeah, I want to do more stories with him, but I want to do stories that fit his narration style better. Like Cursed Object, I say, is one of the few that Scott wasn't able to top just because I wrote that character with Dr. Creepin's voice in mind. So nobody else will ever be able to replicate that. But that story fits Dr. Creepin's narration style way better than Werewolves Are Assholes or I Ride for Serper or Worst Hotel, where it's very animated and these characters very articulate and loud and boisterous. Scott's better at that. He's just better at that. Where Dr. Creepin's narration style is focused more on his voice itself rather than his articulation and his ability to emote. So I want to do more stories that might not even have anything to do with the worst verse, but that match his style better. And that, like I said, that depends on how well I'm able to continue doing this. Because there's so many different stories that I've had to put on the back burner that I just haven't had time to write. Like, I mean, I've got an entire book I want to do exclusively about that story that Abigail mentioned when she helped stop a serial killer in the 1980s called The Girl in the Box, that I haven't been able to do anything with just for sake of time. A Room to Let, which is like a vampire parody of Lady Killers that I never got to really go into. Dead and Disruptive, which is a story about like the afterlife in the worst verse and what that's like, that I never got to do just for time's sake. Just all, and I've got a Front Spike, which is like a non-paranormal story in the worst verse that I never got. I got like 2 parts in, and just had to shift focus to the other stuff for time's sake. So the more I'm able to get out of this, and not have to do other regular work, is the more time I can sit and focus on this for hours at a time and write more and more and more content, because I've got so many ideas. I could write more than Scott could ever hope to narrate. Uh, but I just don't have the time. So to have the time, I need the money that time is worth to be able to do it. So uh, that's what we're going to be doing this last season of Cerber, and then there onwards is trying to get more serious about this and make it to where I can do this more regularly and hopefully get more stuff out to you guys. Um, what you guys want me to write will have more sway because you guys will be financing the writing. So, like, what you want me to focus on would be more important to me in that regard rather than me just doing whatever because it's something I do in my free time. It would be something I did in a more professional capacity. So that's what I'm trying to focus on doing. Uh, is this thing that I really enjoy and making some kind of at least partial living off of that. Uh, so that's like what's coming through with that. The sketchbook version of the Dirty Working Book. Sketchbook version. I don't. Well, it's just right now. It's just stuff that's like available on the printing service, and whatever they make is what you can get a hold of. Like I'm looking for a different company to do all that stuff on because right now it's just on TeePublic. And the reason I went with TeePublic is because their prints were really, really good. It wasn't because they give you the most money per sale or anything. I don't really care. I'm not going to get rich off of worst first T-shirts and notebooks. It was just something where if people wanted the merchandise, they had a place to get it. And at the time, they had the best prints. And then the last few that I've gotten from them, like every time I put a new T-shirt out or a new graphic, I get a sample of it to see if there's anything I need to tweak with the design or anything like that to adjust the colors or the brightness. And this last few times, the prints have just been horrible. Like you get that vinegar smell when you open them because they didn't let them cure enough, which means that the pattern comes off. You can peel it off with your finger, like as soon as you get it. Um, so I'm looking for new. Like they're still up right now, but I'm looking for a new company, and they might have, you know, different options of things you can get the graphic printed on. But that's just what's available on TeePublic. Like you can get like what they print off of there. Like they have a notebook, they don't have a sketchbook. That's because they don't offer a sketchbook. It's not because like that's what I offer. It's just what they print stuff on. So, um, I mean, I'm sure there's a way you could cannibalize. Like you get the notebook and then take out the notebook paper and then like reinsert and rebind it with sketch paper. That would probably be a possibility. Um, I'm almost certain, especially if it's like uh, a hardcover, then it would be exceptionally easy. Yeah, yeah. Most narrators like they'll have to work. Like there's some who do it full time. Uh, that's like their job. That's what they can do. Is they have that big audience. But like yeah, the um, that's why I want to be able to hire Scott to narrate the worst first stories. Is when you do a series. Like I had a long conversation with Mr. Creepypasta about this when he was at Comic Con one year. Is when you do a series, it does not matter how good the series is. Like an example I use is Baraska, like arguably one of the greatest creepypasta series ever written. As you look between the first part and the second part, there's a massive decline in views. That's always going to happen. And the more parts you go down, the greater decline the views are going to be. It does not matter what the story is. You're never going to get the same amount of views on the last part as you do the first part. Now, there's this weird, what I call the last part anomaly, where the last part will tend to get, for whatever reason, more views than a few parts leading up to it. But you're never going to get 1-to-1 the same amount of views on the first part and last part. So if we want series to go on longer, I want Scott to be able to make his time back out of that. So even if it's not the greatest series, it doesn't do as well, if there's a following to it and people want to see what happens next, and I'm only anticipating like 5,000 views on the last part, I want to be able to pay him what he would make if it got 20,000 views or 30,000 views, so he can still narrate it worry free and not have to go, well, I'm probably not going to make the time that I invest in this. And instead do something else. Is he's going to look at it and go, I could narrate a story and hope that it gets 20,000 views over X amount of weeks or months, or I could narrate this one that's going to get 5,000 views, but get paid what I would if it got 30,000 views and get paid immediately. And that's going to be a huge factor. If I can do that, then the worst first stories will be a no issue thing. They'll always be narrated. They'll always be consistent. And Scott will always have good reason and motivation to do them, because that being paid immediately for that work done will be a lot better for him as well than trying to squeeze out that amount of work over time in, fraction of a cent in ad revenue per view. So and it's not a lot, like when you really factor it in, like a video with like 22,000 views or will get you a fair amount of money. Like, you'll get like 22,000, you'll get like $44 off of that video. 11,000 views will get you like $22, $20 maybe. So he can narrate a video that takes him an hour and a half to narrate, and he gets, in British pound sterling, whatever the dollar equivalent of, like $20. And I would rather him be sure he's getting a better amount of money. Like if I can give him $30 to narrate that, then that would be much better than hoping that he gets it back off of views steadily over time. So, it's one of those things that works out for everybody if it's done properly and carefully. Yeah, it's unavoidable. People have limited attention spans. It's going to happen regardless of the series. And if you want to be a narrator, that's something you're going to have to consider. Uh, is I would say, don't start a series that isn't finished. From the perspective of a narrator, from a writer, I've released series and they've been narrated before they were finished. But if I was looking at it from a narrator, I wouldn't start narrating a series that isn't finished, because you don't know how long it's going to run. You're committing to that, which it could be 5 parts or it could be 50 parts. So you would have to take a gamble on that and not even understand, like the quality might decline. Like maybe they had a really good strong start and then they lose focus as the series progresses and the quality declines. So you have that to worry about. But yeah, you're going to lose views over time with each subsequent part. Unavoidable, period. The only weird thing is, like I said, that last part anomaly where you're going to get more views on that last part than you do the 3 parts leading up to that, but it's not going to match the number of views you get on the first part ever. So like I said, it doesn't matter how good the story is. Borrasca is one of the best creepypastas that have ever been narrated. And you go and you look at it like on Mr. Creepypasta's channel, the decline between the first and second part is hundreds of thousands that just drop off. So it's something that has to be taken into consideration. And I want to be able to do a guilt-free series. That was the whole reason behind having the view count requirement for the last part of the second season of Cerber. Is I wanted to make sure that there would be enough of an audience there to justify doing this season with him, to do this last season, uh, to make sure that it built up over time. Like it wasn't that I thought it, like I knew over time that view count would be met. It was just I wanted to be sure that that audience was there and existed before we started this last season and committed to it, because it is bigger. There's 15 parts instead of 12. Uh, Several of them are over an hour long, are going to be over an hour long in narrations. Uh, I put a lot of work into it. I've done animations for it, like beginning and ending animations. Doing original thumbnail art for every single individual part. Got permission from my favorite musician to use one of their songs for the end theme. Like, there's a lot going into this story this season, so it's not just some flippant, well, I got it. I'll go ahead and barf out this last season. It's I wanted to make it a big deal and a big send off for them. Yeah, it's weird. I guess people like with the Spider-Man thing, because I don't know anybody who would argue that Spider-Man 3 was a better movie than Spider-Man 2. Um, but simultaneously, the third one got a lot more exposure and uh, a lot more revenue than the second one. Uh, God, I think the second Spider-Man was my favorite of the three, but for some reason, Spider-Man 3 tended to do better. It's this weird anomaly. Like it, I see it more like movies are a different thing. Movies and sequels are a different thing, but I see it very frequently with the creepy pasta narration stuff. It's um, very consistent there. And that's just something I noticed just looking at the views in my own series, just tracking the views that they had as I'll like go through and read comments or crap like that. This is just something that always happens. It doesn't matter if it's like Werewolves Are Assholes or Worst Hotel or anything like that. But the longer series really let you see that a lot better. uh, and then, but it is something that I see, especially in the longer series, where you see that kind of decline. But it just in Dirty Work Inc. It will tend to be very apparent within that confine of a very short series, like 5 parts, 6 parts. That last part will jump up in views above the ones that lead up to it, and I can't, for the death of me, figure out. Like, there's some parts that people will have like a certain scene or something they like, so they'll revisit that. So you'll get like 32,000 views, 30,000 views, 28,000 views, 30,000 views, 18,000 views, and it's a weird progression that's kind of hard to always estimate or guess at what it's going to be. But that tends to be something you see a lot, is that last part will get like an elevated amount of views for whatever reason. I guess it could be that you tend to want to go out on a high note uh, on the last part, so it tends to be what people's favorite is a possibility. Um, but I don't have like a thing I can say for sure. This is why the views tend to spike on that last part. But there is one thing that is for sure, is that you will get diminishing views over time with any series you do, no matter how good. So you can pick the best series and you can narrate it masterfully. Each and every part is going to get diminishing views. So I would say look at something that you can see that last part getting the same amount of views as like what your one-off stories would get. Like if you do like a random one-off 20, 30 minute story, if you can't see the series last part getting that many views, then you're going to be losing something there, because it's going to be diving off until there's virtually nothing left by the end. I like Liam Vickers. It's true of his channel. He's like one of my favorite writers. Like the guy, for those of you, the guy who does like Murder Drones, because that's gotten really popular because it was animated and people like animation more than just narrations. That's just how it is. But he before that he would write. He has a channel called Scary Storytime with Liam, and some of my favorite stories are on there, like Black Dogs, amazing series. But as you go down, the views steadily decrease. It will happen with everything. If it happened with Baraska, it will happen with anything. Um, so that's just what you have to expect with any series, and that's why I want to be able to hire Scott rather than just get like let him narrate these stories and hope that he makes his money back on. No, like I don't typically like spoilers, but no, that's kind of the whole thing behind goblins is that they're extremely crafty. Um, they, like I said, they're small. Like you just saw the story where a goblin robbed a whole host of different paranormal entities right under their noses. Like they're like the paranormal rats. Like they can get through small spaces and weasel around and everything like that. Uh, so, and I'm not the kill the animal type of guy for the most part. I think that's kind of a cheap cop out for a lot of things. Uh, is if people want an easy tragedy, they kill the dog, and I've always seen that as kind of a really cheap cop out to, you know, a free emotional trauma that's easy to get it to squeeze out of people. So you're not likely to see that really in any of my stuff. No, I find that Goblin is more useful as a source of comedy than a source of tragedy. Uh, so that tends to be, you know, where he is. Like you want to be able to build up. Like I want to challenge myself. I don't want to take the easy alternatives. Like Mark, objectively a pretty shitty guy. He's an anti-hero, and from any other perspective, he would be an antagonist. And I wanted to be able to make people feel bad that he died. Like that was the challenge there. Like Mark's kind of a rotten guy, and wanted to see if I could make people sad when he died. So I want to challenge myself in these things to, not take the easy way out, to see what I can do. That's been the whole point of these all along, is to kind of see what I can do with these stories and to challenge myself personally and, you know, write difficult things and see what I can do, what I can get away with. So you're not going to catch me taking like the easy way out, you know, the old Yeller death or things like that. So, oh yeah, yeah, you're going to see, well, you're going to see less of him later on. Because, like I said, the Goblin was more of a Dirty Work Inc. fixture, and I wanted to give him like one last big hurrah in Jose's day off, because the Dirty Work Inc. story kind of picks up. Like I've been contemplating making a deal, like a circumstantial bargain, where I'll do a third season of Dirty Work Inc. if I get like X amount of Patreon subscribers or something like that. It's popular enough I can hold it for ransom in some way, but it was never intended to be like a serious series like people take it. It was a gap between conjoining seasons of I Ride for Cerber. But there's another character that you're going to be introduced to that will kind of take the Goblin's place in the new series of stories, which is Safe Word the Imp. And she's going to have her whole thing going on, uh, to where you have a lot of those situations you can get with the goblin, but in a different circumstance. Like the people in Discord already know about safe word and the imps and kind of the purpose they serve in the story. But like I wanted to give the goblin at least one last big moment in the sun with Jose's day off. But if we come to it and do a third season of Dirty Work Inc., then yeah, he'll be back and you'll get to see him in the midst of like the new ownership of uh, and then there's also opportunities for you to see him. Like I said, he belongs to Louis, and after this arc ends, Louis isn't going to be a main character anymore. He's going to be like a secondary, tertiary character. You'll still get opportunities to see him, and that'll become more apparent. Like when you start to read through where monsters play, because that's another thing I'm going to be doing for the Patreon real soon. Is I'm going to release the first parts to those three series on the Patreon, so people can see who are on there what the next series of stories is going to be. I've, that's one thing that I get a lot that I never expected is people doing like D&D characters and campaigns on these stories, and just never expect, because I don't really play D&D. Like everything I know about Dungeons and Dragons is like through nerd osmosis. So I've had people like come to me and be like, "Hey, can you?" And like, I don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, and they kind of explain stuff to me to where I can give them an outline for a campaign or something. I'm like, "Well, here, this is kind of what I would do," and give them that, let them run through it. But I've gotten so many messages about people telling me that they've done like Wars First inspired Dungeons and Dragons campaigns and stuff like that, and more so than like fan art or fan fiction or anything like that. I've gotten people telling me about doing Dungeons and Dragons related or Wars First related Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and that was the last thing I ever expected when I started writing this. It was so weird. And so I get a lot of messages about games, like doing a Dirty Work Inc. game, like an actual like computer game or something. And I have no knowledge of how to do any of that video game development, like at all. Uh, so that's completely out of my wheelhouse. I wouldn't even know where to begin with something like that. Not opposed to it. I think it would be pretty cool. Like that's one of the better ideas I've heard from like just the random listeners is that would be pretty cool. Is paranormal Grand Theft Auto kind of thing would be really fun to see, uh, or Grand Theft Auto with a horror aspect to it. I think would be really fun. Um, so that would be something I'd be really excited to see, as far as like Mo Fuchsias has her comic book thing with her original Cerber series. So that's still going on right now. I think they're getting out the first copies of that to people, and doing tables and stuff with it. Um, and I've heard people asking if I was going to do anything. And as far as a comic book goes, probably not. Um, I would like to see my things is I would like to see this as a visual or like a graphic novel. Would be pretty fun. But I've always been more of a manga person as opposed to comics. It's just always appealed to me. So if I could find somebody who wants to do like a manga adaptation of like I Ride for Cerber, Werewolves or Assholes or anything like that, then yeah, I'd be down with that 100%. Uh, LA is the main setting. Um, Two things is I've always liked movies. A lot of what I learned, like I said, as I kind of broke down introspected and analyzed my own writing. A lot of what I learned about writing was through movies. My grandparents in Tennessee owned a video store, a pick and flick video, and so I was never uh, short of movies to watch as a kid. And my mom was never really around when I was a kid. My parents were divorced. My mom was never really around. I had movies. Like, we always lived kind of off on our own. I never really had friends close to me. I was never in a neighborhood with a bunch of friends. I had movies, so I watched a lot of movies, and that kind of where a lot of my writing sensibilities come from. Where I learned how to write and tell a story. Well, not necessarily write, but how to tell a story. And then I had to figure out what works in writing versus what works in writing a movie or a screenplay. Is that they don't all work. You have to adapt for what you're writing. Um, but yeah, so I wanted a place that made sense. But also, the original Cerber series was set like up towards Sacramento in California. So I wanted there to be a reason that Jose could run into Adeline, uh, but also be far enough away that um, him and Jim weren't just going to run into each other arbitrarily. I didn't want what one of them does to affect the other one in any real major way. So that had to be an aspect to it. And also, like, thinking where Jose is, like, he's a bike messenger, so he's going to think, well, I want to move to a large city very far away from the scary spider monsters that I can make a living as a bike messenger. And Los Angeles, California, if you don't know about Los Angeles, California, and know that they don't have the same kind of bike messenger system there, it would make sense. So then he gets there and he figures out that the way bike messengers work in Los Angeles, California isn't necessarily the same way. That's why he's struggling to find work when we meet him at the beginning of the story. Uh, so it's what he thought would happen versus what would actually happen, but it also makes sense. But also the weirdness of LA, like when people think of LA, they think weird, and it's also the setting of like that area in Los Angeles County is kind of the setting of Lost Boys. Uh, you know, so I wanted all that to kind of make sense and tie into each other. And then but yeah, that and I also had to get familiar with it. Like, I know my way around Lincoln Heights now just about as well as I know my way around my own town, because I spent so much time like looking at it and figuring out the locations of it. Uh, so that that was something like I wanted to know times from each location, how long it would take for somebody to get there. So if there's a chase, I know where they need to go, how they need to get there. Uh, and that's where, again, like it's something I wanted to be able to set a lot of different stories in, and build on that and really kind of mess with it. Uh, it's also a large populous center. Like, it makes sense for there to be a lot of different things there, different people, different paranormal things. Uh, so yeah, there was a lot of reasons I decided to go with LA, because it would have been easier just to continue writing the story like over here in the South where I'm familiar with. But like I said, where's the fun in that? Where's the challenge in that? Like, uh, like Werewolves or Assholes is based like around where I lived in Tennessee, like around Goodlettsville. Even though like some of the characters I know, like Gay Jake and Tony, and like they live down here in Alabama, where Tony still does in the story. But like Gay Jake lives here in Alabama, but the story's set like up in Tennessee near the Nashville perimeter, like Middle Tennessee, Goodlettsville, Murfreesboro, Hendersonville, places like that. Uh, but I wanted to tell a story where a lot of stories don't get told, but that's why that's set there in Nashville area, and then a lot of the other story is set in L.A. Yeah, it took some getting used to. Like, you very easily find me here at night just strolling through the streets of LA on Street View on Google Maps, getting familiar with the area. like the Dirty Working building. If you've seen the map that I posted on the Reddit, is an actual funeral home. Like the location of the Dirty Working building is in the location of an actual funeral home in Lincoln Heights. Uh, so everything kind of makes sense. So then, like in this series or in this season of Cerber, you see like they're going to places that actually exist. The characters in there that run them are different because I don't know the people in those different places, so I had to make characters up who work in those places. But stuff around the perimeter, you'll see like is actual locations in that area that I had to learn to get familiar with the area in a place that I've never been and never lived and had no idea. Um, you Dr. Jekyll uh, is less likely to know that than like Abigail. Abigail is more apt to, and you do get some kind of idea of that through the story. Like if you just pay attention, kind of, you can kind of get the idea. Like uh, like how Yahweh shows up, you kind of get that a lot of them can start off as regular people. Uh, and then you have like lineages. Like a lot of it traces back to the hotel. That's why it's a central fixture. That's why it's called the Worst Verse, is because it's centered around the Worst Hotel. Uh, but she is one of the more knowledgeable people in the universe on the history of that world and how things work in it. Whereas uh, Dr. Jekyll is getting to the microscopic mechanics of it and why the paranormal is the paranormal rather than necessarily the whole history of it. So Abigail is the historian, where Jekyll is the scientist. That's why Abigail works as an appraiser for like paranormal artifacts. Is she knows the history well enough to be able to look at something and go, I know where that came from. I know who made it. I know how long it's been around. Where Dr. Jekyll will look at it and try and figure out how it works, why it does what it does, things like that. So they're two separate uh, sides of the same coin. Yeah, that's like a lot of people will call that a twist, and that's not necessarily the case. There's twists and there's revelations. Twists in a story are meant to make you think one thing and then show you that it was something else all along. Whereas a revelation is like something doesn't make sense until a certain piece of information is revealed, and then everything falls into place. Like with if it's the last thing I do, where the story seems familiar, but people don't really get where it's going until that last line at the end makes everything fall into place. Like, oh, okay, now I understand what the story was. Um, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot of setting up very careful blocks. But I've told people you can a lot of the big revelations you can piece together. I write these things like a detective novel. It's an old habit. That's what I used to write before I actually started putting this stuff on the internet. Um, and what I've always been obsessed with. I love mystery and detective novels. Um, but if you really pay close attention, you can piece these things together. Like with what you were talking about with Hook and Ash, Hook and his brother. You had that information like far, far back. Like if you listen to the second part of Worst Hotel, it says that Ash, when he's talking to Travis, says that his brother just left for the States. So this is pre-automobile. This is a certain time. Pre-automobile slavery was still a thing back then. So, well, explicit slavery still exists now. We can go into a long political conversation about that, but slavery still exists right now. But uh, like explicit free slavery was still a thing. it was seafaring, so you had that clue, and then you had Hook's last name around part 5 of I Ride for Cerber. So you had James Kravinock, and then when he gives Jose the knife, it says Ash Kravinock on it. So you have an orichalcum infused blade with somebody's last name that matches Hook's, but somebody's first name who doesn't. So it wasn't Hook's. It was somebody. It was a knife that belonged to a man named Ash Kravinock who can make orichalcum infused blades. So you have those things there you can put together. You just have to be able to pay attention, retain them, and put them together. It's all there. So like I had somebody say, "Well, it seems like it came out of." I'm like, "No, dude, that's been set up since the second part of Worst Hotel. You just have to pay attention to it. It's been back all the way there. Like this season with Tom Cruise, I've been building this. I can't wait for you guys to see that. But to get that payoff, I've been building that one up forever. So I'm really excited about that one. But I like being able to build those things up to where you look back and go, okay, now I see why that was there. So people say, well, what's the significance of that? And then later on, you see it, and I really enjoy setting those things up. It's like one of my favorite things about doing that. Yes. Yeah. It's like I said, I wanted him to be. I think I was talking about this on the Reddit with somebody the other day. Uh, like if you've seen the new Puss in Boots movie, The Last Wish, like nobody cares about Puss in Boots or any of the other characters. The only person that matters in that whole movie is Death the Wolf because they made this outstanding villain. Because they copied almost point for point Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men because they understand how to make a good villain, and it's the same thing that makes people like Han Lao is he's not always there. When he is there, he dominates the scene. You never really know what they're up to, what they're going to do next, what they're planning. There's always a weight to their presence, and I wanted Ash to be this consistent fixture in the background of all these stories. And he had I was bouncing back and forth whether I wanted to make Cursed Object a regular series, and I finally decided against it. I wanted him to have his introduction and Cursed Object, and then have him be this background fixture to all of these stories that link them all together through that. So you'll have the characters interacting, but you'll have him there too. Like no matter what the series was, he was in there. So he was in his Cursed Object story. He was in Werewolves Are Assholes. He was in Worst Hotel. He was in Cerber. He was in Dirty Work Inc. And that's like I wanted to kind of show the connection there that he is the central antagonist that all of our protagonists have to deal with at some point. Like he is the boss at the end of the game, so to speak, in a certain way. He's not like the final boss. Like you'll see that later on. But where he's the one working towards the most disruptive thing that's going on in the worst verse right now. So he's the most relevant antagonist, and he's behind most of everything that happens with our character in the world. Like he made the weapons for Lita that drove uh, the vampires way out in the middle of the woods to where our protagonists and Werewolf for Assholes meet them. Uh, he's the one who set the bugs free in the hotel that uh, chased uh, Jose all the way out to LA. Like he's uh, behind a lot of things that happened to Travis. So he's always there doing things and motivating the events of the story, even in small ways. So he's always been a consistently important fixture. But then later on at this last arc, you see like how all that comes together and what his goal was actually, as opposed to the fiction that he told people in Cursed Object, where he just made something up to put that out there, and then you see his real motivations later on. Okay, yeah. So yeah, that was what I was talking. Is yeah, it's that's I'm not telling you guys that that's part of uh, a big part of the last season of Cerber. Like that's what funnels into it is uh, that story picks up around part 6, the end of part 6 of End of the Road. Like that, the end of Dirty Work Inc. coincides with the end of part 6 of I Ride for Cerber, and that's where that. Uh, well, I think part 6. It might have been earlier on, part 5. It either begins. It's a weird match. Okay, the end of. Okay, how can I explain this? The end of Dirty Work Inc. coincides with uh, the end of part 6 of End of the Road, because there's some overlap where you see Mark alive in End of the Road, where the death occurs as the story progresses through End of the Road, and then that story picks up and takes off from there. Then you'll find out as the story progresses who killed Mark and why, and how that plays into the story, because it's a bigger deal. Like as the story goes, and you find out why it's a big deal that Mark's dead and why that's relevant to the story in End of the Road. Yeah, well, it's the sword has a much more nefarious purpose than uh, what people have kind of made it out to be so far. Like there's a reason behind it. Like I said, I really wanted to sell how important the orichalcum is, and the fake orichalcum, the faux orichalcum, uh, is relevant, and how important and interwoven vampires are tied into this whole story. And then when you understand like the nature of vampires and how they exist and why they exist, uh, things like complex, where you establish like this, the what I would call the real antagonist of the story is you have the main antagonist, which is Ash, but then the real antagonist, which is this entity that you'll hear described as the old man, the rotting one, different things. Uh, where all of this factors in. There's these different aspects of it that will make sense, like more and more sense as that funnel narrows in on that last combined arc of the series. Uh, that will make everything make much more sense. Oh, we got to do. I couldn't tell you. That would be something to ask him. I don't know. I know, like some people have told me that my stories inspired them to write. But beyond that, I couldn't tell you. I don't think I've listened to much of Bull's Heart yet. That one's on my go back and circle around to list. Uh, but the only thing I know is there was a huge like insurgence or resurgence of werewolf stories after the first werewolves are assholes got narrated on Dr. Creepin's channel, where they were just everywhere because nobody was doing werewolf story. The only werewolf story I had listened to prior to me posting it was a really good one. If you get a chance, listen to it. It's called Mommy and Daddy, and it's one of the better werewolf stories. It's like a legitimate, scary horror werewolf story that I also love. Like I like my comedy werewolf stories and shit, but that was a supremely good and genuinely scary werewolf story. It's called Mommy and Daddy, and that was the only one that I heard for a while that made any impression to me. And then when I did Werewolves Are Assholes, and that took off in popularity, everybody tried to do two things. They tried to do werewolf stories and they tried to do horror comedy mixes. And there were some people who got it, some people who understood what to do and how to make it work. But for every one person who did, there were like 10, 15, 20 people who didn't. And that burnt a lot of people out on it to where that was just what everybody was doing and everybody got tired of it really quick. So I don't know if I inspired or influenced the guy who wrote Bull's Heart to any extent, but I know for whatever reason that popularity that it got on Dr. Creepin's channel early on spurred this uptick in werewolf stories and in mixed the horror comedy genre stories for a while, before the ultra badass hunter self insert stories picked up. And I'm glad that took focus off of what I do, because that's what everybody's doing now, and I can do my thing, kind of in my own little space again. Yeah, I've heard of Taxi Dancer. Yeah, I, I'm uh, I'm always like 50-50 on the military stories. Is that a lot of them will commit that sin I always talk about of trying to explain how much they know about the military and guns and all that garbage. And some of them uh, can do a lot better. Weird Shit I've Seen as a Marine, like the original Weird Shit I've Seen as a Marine series was really good because it doesn't tend to do that very much. It goes into the experience rather than the military jargon and things like that really distract from the story. There's a lot more story with that original Weird Shit that I saw as a Marine. Uh, that I liked about that story. Like some of them were like genuinely like kind of like anxiety inducing and scary, and I like those. But conversely, you will have those that will just go into like, oh, well, this is these small details about firearms and military jargon and stuff like that, and that one really turns me off real quick. So it depends on whether or not they do that. That I'll tend to follow military type stories a lot. I say if they prioritize the story over the fact that they're in the military, yeah, I love a good story like that. Like, and I love, and this is somebody who loves military movies and stuff. Like, always been big into Black Hawk Down, Lone Survivor, The Covenant. Love those types of movies, but they're well written and they're well directed and well played, and they don't spend a lot of time going, well, here's these tiny little minutia about like the equipment we have and what we call things. Nobody cares about that. Like, that's not why people are there. They're there for a story, the human drama that entails. And that's how I tend to determine whether I'm going to like a military oriented story or anything like that. And that's what comes to mind is the original Weird Shit that I saw as a Marine series is very good about that. At keeping the, like, there's still some that they have to like elaborate on, like this is what this means and this is how we do things, but they keep it to a minimum, and you get to into the story and what's actually going on and the events of the story, and that's what I like about those. No, yeah, I mentioned that a little while ago. Is one of the three new series that will take over after the current ones are done is Tales of Haley Handiwork. The difference here is that it's not going to be told from her perspective, or the perspective of the protagonist from the original story. Tales of Haley Handiwork are going to be different stories told from different people's perspectives. Like, if you remember the ritual that the guy mentioned at the end of this story, that's going to be the focal point. Is people who do the ritual and meet Haley Handiwork and their experiences with that. Like, as she goes from, like, it's based on, like, I made the reference here, so there's, I mean, I'm not going to be spoiling it for too many people. Like, some people have already figured it out probably, but I based her on like the old creepy pasta lore of like Slender Man and the proxies. Is that's how that kind of goes? Is it gives a way to link into like her boss that you hear her refer to, um, and like how she goes from that and you know, from like her first time being summoned, like the first part of Tales of Haley Handiwork is it picks up from her first time being summoned through the ritual, and then later on it's like different time skips, and she, you know, deals with different things, and you see different parts of her personality from different perspectives of different people and how they interact with her uh, throughout this event, and then that's part of the main driving story arc behind that is I wanted to tell a story in a different way to where the main character is being seen through different perspective. Like the main character isn't the one telling the story. Basically, is Tales of Haley Handiwork are tales of Haley Handiwork being told from the perspectives of different people. Every story, but that also means that every story is going to be longer, so there's going to be fewer parts. So like you'll have the longer running series, which is like where monsters play and we deal in dreams, and you'll have more parts of those. But Tales of Haley Handiwork will be less frequent but longer parts in general when they happen because you have to establish the narrator, the person telling the story, the situation, the ritual, how they come into contact with the ritual, them doing the ritual, the events that ensue. So you have a lot more to build each part. So the parts necessarily have to be longer to tell a good story, which is also why the original Handiwork was so long, is because that type of story requires a long lead up. It doesn't work without, you know, taking a long time to invest emotionally in those characters. So you have to make those parts longer, but there'll be fewer parts. So it's kind of a trade off back and forth. But yeah, that's how that's going to work out. Is and it's that particular story. Like I said, I'm not spoiling this for you, but that particular story is extremely important. Um, Go back, listen to it again, and then listen to it again. There's small details in there that if you don't pay attention to, very here in the near future, you're going to miss huge revelations about very important things in the universe if you don't pay really close attention to the original Handiwork story. I can't stress how important that story is. Um, it's an extremely important story, and a lot of people who are following the Cerber stories and the Worst Hotel stories and the Werewolves Rassel stories and the whole Worst are ignoring that one. Like I can see by the view count, and they're not going to have a clue because they passed that story over and they missed super important details that are going to be extremely important here real soon. Um, so yeah, and not just in the uh, new set of series, but in stuff that's coming up here real soon. Like it literally like this story, Winter Camp ends uh, at the same spot, like right after the murders of the story in Haley Handiwork, like or in the Handiwork story. Uh, like it's directly mentioned at the end of that book, so it all ties back in together. So if you ignore that story, or you didn't pay attention to every small detail, then you're going to be missing out on huge things. It's an extremely important story that if you don't pay attention to, you're going to be missing out on a lot of important stuff because it's never going to be explicitly said in a lot of the stuff. Like you're going to have to be able to put details together, and if you don't find the details, you don't remember the details, then you're going to miss out on it. So if you don't pay attention to that story, you're going to miss out on a huge stuff in the rest of the series. Uh, so yeah, like there's going to be a Handiwork series, but just that story alone, even if there wasn't a Handiwork series, just that one story alone is extremely important to the rest of the Worst stories in a big way, uh, even if it's not immediately apparent. Like the Hollywood Antiques tie-in was not the biggest Easter egg, biggest Worst Easter egg in that story by a long shot, like not even close, and nobody caught it. I haven't seen a single person who's caught it so far, but it was there's a big tie-in that makes it really important to everything else in the worst verse. Yeah. Yeah. It should be like I say you. It's on the Patreon. Like people can read it like the whole story on the Patreon right now. I think it was. I think I posted that like pre going in and editing a lot. So some of the stuff I might have missed that's corrected in the book. But the story is essentially there's no changes in the story. Like there might be a word that didn't get capitalized or something because the spell checker doesn't scan for capitalization. It just checks for whether a word is spelled correctly. But it's there in the Patreon for people there. But it shouldn't be too long. Like I've got the second uh, sample coming for like chapter spacing and stuff like that. Like this one right now is 73 pages, but at the same time the text is really small. So I'm going to make the text bigger, and this doesn't have the indentations or anything. Uh, so after that, and spaced out to make sure that I have this weird thing that I need chapters to end on the right or begin on the right side. So once I do that, increase the text, the script size, and have all the indentations and have everything spaced out. There'll probably be because I know in the next copy that's coming, just having the chapter set made it 80 something pages. So I want to get it to like 90 something, so it's a more substantial book. But yeah, it should be ready here by uh, September, mid September ish, because I've got a thing I've got to do in Tennessee. So that I do every year. You see me posted on the Reddit where I do the live show, the comedy show at the Tennessee Fair. Um, so I've got to do that, and that takes up a few weeks. Uh, so I'm going to be working on doing all the final adjustments to that, and then that'll be available. And they're not expensive. Like when I ordered the sample copy, the copy itself costs less than the shipping. Like they're not expensive. The hardbacks are, and they take forever to print. So I'll probably be doing paperback for most of them because they look fine. Like the cover is really good, and I'll probably do the limited edition thing in hardback. But for the most part, that's it'll be fine in paperback. Like it's just getting a hard copy to people. But I really want to get on Scott doing an audiobook version, and however much it'll cost to do that. Uh, but that'll probably, like I said, that'll probably come later, like after uh, End of the Road is done, all that. And like I said, how much I'm able to uh, get moving with taking this writing stuff here, this writing stuff seriously, and actually trying to make a decent amount of money off of it without like holding a bunch of content ransom. Because I don't like the idea of that. I don't like a lot of exclusive stuff. Like I want to do as minimal amount of exclusive stuff like on the Patreon as possible. I would rather people just like donate because they want to see the stories continue, than be doing it like out of like enticement for like gifts and benefits and stuff. So I want to do the minimum amount of that. But like for like the Hooks Crew thing, like if people are going to be donating like $20 a month, then I want them to get something out of it, like the coin and junk like that we're doing. But other than that, I would really like people to just donate like the minimum amount, like that $1.50 tier. Like that's ideally that's my perfect world of creepy pastas. Is everybody who listens to these stories take $5 at the end of the month and pick their 5 favorite writers, not just me. Like I want this to work for everybody. Just take $5 at the end of the month, pick their 5 favorite writers, and donate $1 to each of them. And like, if you got like a regular audience of like 20,000 people and everybody did that, then that's $20,000 a month. Like, I don't expect everybody to do that, but you only need a fraction of that for your favorite writers, your favorite 5 writers, to be able to do this professionally full time and constantly pump out content instead of, like, having to have like the narrators have to pay them to use it or something and hope that their story gets picked. Like, if you just like took $5 at the end of every month and paid each of your favorite, like your 5 favorite writers, $1 a month, golden age of creepypastas will resurface. I guarantee it. You'll have more good stories than you'll know what to do with. And all it costs you is $1 a month. Like, if more people would do it, like, that's my perfect system for creepypasta writers, is that particularly. And I would love that. Like, I don't want like a few people donating $20 a month. I want a bunch of people donating $1 a month. And that works way better because it takes way less out of that person. Like, it reduces the financial burden on them considerably, and it makes it more viable for people like me or any of your other favorite writers to be able to write consistently, even full time, professionally, just doing this, not having to go through publishing companies or anything like that. Like, if everybody who listened to these stories took $5 at the end of every month and donated a single dollar to their 5 favorite writers, the entire system would explode in this golden age of horror story narrations that, like, even like above the golden age of creepypastas, like back in the days of like Jeff the Killer and Slender Man and Ben Drown and all that stuff. It would skyrocket because we would have all the time in the world to write, and all it would take is the average person $1 a month. I mean, like, I really want to like post a picture of me with like a swollen belly, say for $1 a month you can sponsor your favorite writer. And I mean, that's really all it takes. Is it's a very, very simple, cost-effective system. But the problem is getting all those people in on it to really go, no, seriously, it only takes $1. Like, if all of you guys paid $1 like month to your 5 favorite writers, then you would never be short of content. Well, yeah, we have, but like we've come a long way, but we haven't gone anywhere. Like, there's a lot more narrators now trying to get in on that piece of the pie, but because of that, it's the demand for content skyrocketed. Like, I've seen it on Reddit. There's people who pump out these horrible generic stories that all sound the same, that all have the very generic titles. Like, my mom was trapped in the bathroom, and now there's funny noises coming out of it. And it's like the whole story is in the title, and there's nothing left of mystery. And they pump them out like they read the How to Write a Creepypasta page on creepypasta.com, and they just pump those out and just wait for a narrator to pay them X amount of money to narrate it because they need content. Because a lot of that stuff people just fall asleep to. Like, that's what they use it for, is they just want some background noise to fall asleep to, which means that the narrators aren't picking the cream of the crop stories, which means that there's no motivation to write the best possible stories. And you see that. You see the writing for money to be on top of the pile all over the place. Like, they're everywhere, but the quality isn't there. The drive to write the best possible. Like, we haven't had an Anasi's Goatman story in a long, long time. Like, that's one of the most iconic creepypastas ever written, partially because we don't know who wrote it. It's not an anonymous author who wrote Anasi's Goatman story, and it's still one of the most well-known, best creepypastas you can find. But there's a lot of narrators, there's a lot of stories, but the quality isn't there. It's not what it could be, as opposed to having, like, picking like the top tier writers who have made some of the best series but who dropped off the map because they couldn't continue writing. Like everybody is always asking me, oh, when are we going to get more Jim story? When are we going to get? I don't know. I don't write Jim story, but that's entirely dependent on Michelle's ability to write. She has to have time to write. She has a life. She has things she has to do. So it's a lot of people who want that story written, but don't want to provide a mechanism in which she can write that story where they're entirely able to. But you need to give writers the ability to write if you want those stories, as opposed to just sifting through what's there and hoping you find something good. Yeah, well, it's okay. So if you're a narrator and you don't average 50 to 100,000 views on your uploads, you're not going to be able to pay a writer what it takes for a fair amount for the time that they put in it. Like it takes me like hours and hours and hours and hours to write a 30-minute story. Like what's a good word? It has like uh, like, comment, subscribe has like 11,000 views or 22,000. Like there's like $2 per 1,000 views basically is a good rule of thumb for ad revenue on YouTube. So you can make about $2 per 1,000 views. So like, comment, subscribe that I wrote for Scott has about 11,000 views. So that's about $22 he got off of that video, roughly estimating. He got about $22 off that video. Okay. It might have took him an hour-ish to narrate that. Okay. So he got $22 for an hour's work. That story took me multiple hours to write. Okay. So I'm talking like I probably sat for like 7 hours collectively writing just that one story that amounted to about 30 minutes worth of story that took him about an hour to narrate that he made about $20 off of. There's no way he could effectively compensate me for my time writing that story if I wanted to charge him like what I would miss from work. Okay, so like what I do in the real world, I make about $30 an hour, roughly. So, putting it like even if I charge even if that story took me 4 hours to write, right, it's $120. So he had to pay me $120 for a story he made $20 off of. It's not sustainable. So, but that's how people think that this whole, writer narrator economy has to operate. Is the narrator finds a story, they pay the writer whatever amount, and generally the idea is, oh well, if there's several narrators that want to narrate your story, then they all pay you, and then you make. But that's not the typical thing. That's not going to happen with every story. That's not going to happen with every writer. But if you can get the listeners themselves to donate such a minuscule amount as like $1 a month, you're set. You can write whatever. You can pick your favorite narrator, like I have, like with Scott. I only want Scott narrating these stories, and I've turned down other people who wanted to narrate them. Like, I want Scott to do this. He is the perfect fit for these stories. I don't want to see them anywhere else. So I'm not going to be able to follow that model. I don't want 8 different people narrating I Ride for Cerber and Werewolves Are Assholes. And despite the fact that people have been picking them up lately and narrating them without my permission, like I've seen it, and it's not worth trying to take them down to do it because YouTube doesn't give a shit about things like that. You have to pursue actual real world legal action to even start to do something like that. So it's not worth it. It's not worth my time. I have to pay money to get these things removed. So there's no, like I said, if in like Scott's case where he has like 217,000 subscribers and averages like, now he's averaging like 8,000 views a video. So there's no way that he will be able to pay the writers a fair amount to do that. It's just not sustainable. Um, but like I said, if the listeners, who are a huge bulk, who possess much more financial capacity collectively than a single narrator does, who does this part time, were to allot $5 at the end of every month and then donate a single dollar to their 5 favorite narrators every month, then boom, there it goes. Those 5, some of them are going to overlap. You're going to have some people who, one of their 5 is one of the other person's 5, but then they're also going to be different. So there's going to be this huge boom where writers can just sit and write constantly and generate content constantly, and that would be much more beneficial than trying to convince the narrators themselves to try and pay for these stories, because Scott can't do that. Like, there's no way he could pay what it cost me in time to write a series like Cerber. Like the hours that are invested in something, like collectively, like every single part of Cerber and Dirty Work Inc. and Rebels Are Assholes and Worth, there's no way at all he would be able to, but the listeners could. And that's what I've been trying to focus on, is getting the listeners to be the financial backing rather than the narrator. And instead of trying to get, this weird trickle down non-functioning economy into something more direct and dynamic than what's going on right now. So, yeah, that's very important. Like I said, at least you're doing it right. You're asking permission, because there's some people who just don't get that, who just don't understand that. Like, there's people who just take these stories and like, oh well, he let this one person narrate them, that means I can narrate them, and that's not the case at all. Uh, but like, some people will just be inundated with messages, so they'll just like be like, I can't answer all of these, and they'll just forget about them. Like, I do that sometimes. Like, I'll see a message and be like, okay, that's a long message, I'll get back to it later, and then a month later I'll come back to it, oh crap, I completely forgot about that. So and I don't get nearly as many messages as some of these people who are much more active on social media than I am. So that's saying something. That they're probably swamped 24/7. Um, but it is, yeah, it's important to ask permission. But also, another way to do it is to work with a writer specifically, is to find, like, it doesn't have to be the premier writer, but to have somebody who's like, I want to narrate your stories and I want you to write stories for my channel. And like I said, I've offered to do that for a couple of people over the course of the years. Um, and I guess they see like that it's a complex story with a bunch of characters, and they're like, "Oh crap, this isn't just a long row of exposition. Like, I have to bounce back and forth and figure these characters out and stuff." Like, holy crap! Because originally, like, I did, we rated The Wrong Tomb to uh, be narrated by this girl who had her own YouTube channel, and it was going to be a collaboration. Like, I got her a spot where she would be narrating it on Creepin's channel as a guest. Like, I worked all that out, and then she just never did it. I mean, like, I worked it out. I was like, here, this will give you a huge leg up. Like, you'll be on this huge channel. You'll have a part in this series. Um, you'll get huge amounts of exposure, and then you can funnel people into your channel. And then she just didn't do it. I mean, it was all there, all worked out. I had everything set up for her, and didn't do it. So, I mean, you can literally try and spoon feed some people these opportunities, and they won't take them. Uh, but when it comes to narrations, yeah, as long as you're getting permission, but yeah, it can be a chore. And you have to be a salesman. Like, how you present yourself to them as a narrator is as important as what they present as a writer. Like, you've already seen what they offer. Now they have to see what you offer. Uh, and like I said, generally, if you get like somebody who's getting offers from like big YouTubers like Dark Somnium and Mr. Creepypasta and Creeps McPasta and people like that, they're probably not going to give a startup YouTuber the time of day. So you have to direct your focus to other people, and like people like that post on the Nature's Temper subreddit or Dr. Creepin's Vault would be a place to do that. To where, because no sleep is I don't do no sleep. I posted a few things on it and hated the whole experience. So I don't do no sleep. I post exclusive, like some stuff I don't even post uh, to the Reddit. I just send it directly to Scott because I want it to be like a pop up surprise that nobody's expecting. And I've developed that relationship to where I can do that now and not have to even worry about posting it on Reddit and slicing it up to get through that stupid character limit. Uh, so, like I said, finding your target, right? Like finding writers who are willing to talk to you, who aren't being inundated with offers from these huge YouTubers who probably aren't going to get a smaller one the time of day. Oh, I see G Fish here. Yeah, I was waiting. I was wondering when he would show up, but wait, shoot. But yeah, it's about, like I said, targeting certain people who you're more likely to get a reply from. You can cast a wide net and hope that a few of those went, but you can also, like I said, work on your salesmanship, like how you present yourself to them, and who you're asking. Like I said, the bigger ones, like or if you get somebody like me who has found their narrator for their series, like this is the guy I want narrating this, you're going to have a hard time prying this out of their hands. But if you find the right person, then you can build a relationship with them and start doing it through others. Yeah, it's establishing a rapport with them is a big deal. Like I said with Scott, that was a huge deal for me, because originally, like, I tell people, if Scott had the Nature's Temper subreddit when I originally wrote the first stories, like Werewolves Are Assholes and Cursed Object, that would have been where I posted them. Uh, but at the time, Dr. Creepin was the only person doing anything like Dr. Creepin's Vault, where you can submit them directly to him. And that's the only place he finds narrations for is his vault, where people submit them directly to him, because it's a default permission to narrate. And that's something I would recommend is start your own Reddit, your own subreddit, to where people can submit directly to you. They have a story they want you to narrate. They submit it, and that's a default permission to narrate. But uh, there's a whole backstory with that, and like how I think it's uh, on the it's somewhere on the first part of I Ride for Cerber, but how that all happened. But yeah, like building that rapport and that relationship with Scott makes this so much easier, and it further motivates me to stick with him particularly because of that system we built, and I can message him directly and be like, "Hey, I'm doing this thing," or "Hey, would you be interested in this thing?" And it's so smooth and seamless that I don't have to worry about anything, and that's valuable to me. That holds value to me. So if you can do that too, then yeah, that's absolutely going to help you uh, get bigger into the narrating role. And like I said, I have stories and stuff like small stories. I have two of them I'm sitting on right now. If you want to narrate, I'd be happy to let you narrate. Um, what are they? Aliens and Retirement. Dark, really dark stories. I'm not gonna lie. They're like potentially like demonetizable dark. Um, but there's two of them. They're not worse for stories really. Uh, if you want to narrate them, like I said, find me, message me on Reddit at some point, and I'll send them to you because I just wrote them haphazardly, not thinking about narrating or anything like that. They're on Scott's subreddit somewhere. I don't even think he noticed them when I posted because they're forever ago. But there's two of them. They're two short stories. They're not long. Extremely dark, but they're there and they're collecting dust, and nobody's doing anything with them. And if you need stories to narrate, then there's two of them right there that you have free reign to narrate. So it's no big deal to me. Well, that's what I was talking about a little while ago. Is I've turned down several other narrators uh, over a while that I just Scott's where I want to be. Nature's Temper is the worst first home. Like that's where I want my stories to be. I can't think of anybody who can narrate them better than he can. Uh, so like there's a way I write and there's a way Scott narrates that I can't think of anybody else that matches that better, because most of them, like I said, the trend is people are narrating stories for people to fall asleep to, and that's not the kind of stories I want to write. Um, I want stories that keep people awake at night. I want people to lose sleep over my stories, not to fall asleep to them. And that's what the trend tends to be, is people are writing background noise and people are narrating background noise, and that's not where I want to be. And that tends to be where you see some of the bigger narrators is they have that real smooth, buttery voice, very monotone, very droning, and it's something people used to fall asleep to for the most part. That's the channels they go to, is something that doesn't suddenly scream and then freaks them out, makes them jump. People complain about that. Like, you follow the comments, people don't. There are people who literally complain that they listen to stories to fall asleep, and then like stuff I write where like people suddenly scream, and Scott will scream because that story calls for a scream, and they're like, "No, it woke me up." Sorry, dude. This is the wrong channel for you. This is the wrong story. That's not what I write, and that's not what I want to be a part of. Is there's plenty of market for that. There's plenty of narrators who have plenty of people writing for them. I want to write for Scott. That's it. Like that. That's my channel. Oh yeah, yeah. I still remember when the original iDrive for server came out. I think I was in Tennessee, like once the first few started coming out. I wasn't living there. I was up there for a doing the fair, um, and like that wasn't too long after Werewolves Are Assholes dropped. So uh, that was when I was talking to her about doing the crossover and everything, and that's how that whole thing started to come together. Um, so yeah, that's how I met Michelle, was when I was asking her if she wanted to do a crossover with iDrive for Server and Werewolves Are Assholes, and then it all kind of got mixed together. And instead, well, it wasn't necessarily even a crossover. Really, it was just a little like cameo, a little mention, and then she wanted it to become a crossover, and this whole back and forth thing. And told me, yeah, just write this whole thing. And she let me use Charisse, which was one of my favorite characters, to write this, and gave me kind of like full reign over that. Um, and then we started talking about wanting to uh, do a story together, do a collaborative story about a food delivery version of Cerber. And then she got into that place where she was having trouble writing. She didn't have the time. The circumstances weren't in her favor. So I wrote this pilot part of this thing that was based on there's basically a rework of a story that I had planned, which it wasn't a food delivery service. It was just a parcel delivery service where instead of Adeline, Jose worked for Sobek, and he met him immediately instead of, he never ran into Adeline. But then I changed that around and sent that to her, and she liked it, and she sent it straight to Scott and told him to narrate it and told me to keep writing that story, and that's how that happened. Um, well, yeah. Score is actually very important. Like if you're good at scoring a certain thing, just that background noise can make a huge difference in the tone of it. And that's, like I said, that's something I learned from movies. Is uh, the it doesn't have to be music. It's just the ambience, the noise can make a huge difference to the tone of the things. Um, Either in setting the mood or misdirecting the audience, it can do wonders for a lot of stuff. So yeah, if you get good at doing score to it, then yeah, that will really like elevate each story. The better you get at it, just as long as it's not overpowering. Because there was a time where Mr. Creepypasta was doing that, and you couldn't hear what he was reading over the background noise, which was becoming the foreground noise, and it got really old really fast. But if like you keep it subtle and not let it interfere with the dialogue of the narration, then yeah, it does a lot of difference. Um, yeah. She's it's not like she's bedridden or anything. It's just she has a life. Um, she has a kid and a husband and her own job and her own life, and that's what I tell people is like we do this in our free time. Like we're not professionals. Um, I'm me. I'm alone in this house right now. Like it's just me. I don't have to take kids to school or go on date night with the husband or help my kid with my homework or cook and clean for family. I don't have to do any of that. Like when I want to sit down and write, I can sit down and write. And also, like I tell people, when I'm in a bad place, when I'm depressed or sad or something, I write to help me. That's when I thrive. Like when I wrote the original Werewolves Are Assholes and Cursed Object, that's the lowest point of my life when I wrote those. Um, but conversely, there are people like Michelle who have to be in a completely perfect place of absolute zen before she can write. So that tends to be the give and take. There is, yeah, she's fine, but if she isn't feeling like she can write, then she can't write. And that's just something that like I have to respect. As somebody who follows that series, is somebody that every listener has to respect. Is if you're not paying her to write, she has no obligation to write. I mean, like I don't, like Taxi Driver doesn't, uh, like Mr. Outlaw doesn't. None of us have any kind of obligation to if we're not being financially incentivized to write these things. Like if we don't feel like writing, we don't have to. Like the repercussions for me right now, standing up and going, I'm never writing another word for a story ever again, is zero. Like I lose nothing on that at all. So that's what happens to a lot of writers is you get people who are constantly going, well, when's this next story coming out? Well, why aren't you writing fast enough? Where are you? What's happening? What's going on? We want more story. And the pressure gets to be too much. And they quit because they're like, this is too much. I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm not being incentivized to write. It's driving me crazy. I have a whole life to take care of. So they drop it and the story never gets finished and nobody ever knows what happens. So there's the problem with you know the system is when you have writers who aren't being incentivized to write other than the fun that they get out of writing, you'll have them drop the series or stop writing altogether because they have no real incentive to. There's nothing pushing them to write. So like I said with Michelle, like it's the same as me, but I can write when I'm in these dark, miserable, lonely depths of, you know, misery, and she has to be in a very stable, peaceful state of mind before she can write, which is the only real difference there, aside from the fact that she has a life and I don't. Um, so there's that. Like I said, she's fine. Like there's the comic book that she's been working with the guy to release. Um, and who knows, she might shift gears to that. She might decide she wants to focus more on the comic book version because guess what? That makes her more money. She gets money off of that, whereas she gets nothing off of the narrations. Uh, so like that's just how the cookie crumbles in that regard. Is a lot of them, if they get the chance to pursue something that's more financially viable, like writing a book or something, or writing a comic, they might take that avenue, and that's entirely their prerogative. Oh, we got new stuff. I don't typically get into a lot of deep descriptions. Like, uh, when it comes to story, I don't like to go way into description. I like to let people just imagine what they will for the most part, and then if they want to like check the art in the subreddits and stuff, like I've done a little art of them somewhere. But they like I said, they're very average height. Whereas, uh, where Jose is like more athletic because like he rides a bike, he works out, he exercises a lot. He'll typically be a little bit more tan from being out in the sun. Both have black hair. Uh, Jose tends to have like either hat hair or helmet hair or something like that from having something over his head all the time, so it's like more squished down. Travis tends to have little wild hair, like just years of not taking care of his appearance, just being a neurotic wreck. And he tends to be a lot thinner because like he doesn't exercise. He tends to be pale because he tends to go out more just at night and gamble and be indoors. So and then of course you have Jose scars and stuff that he builds up. But yeah, they're twins, they're identical twins, but their circumstances mean they look different based on like sun exposure, exercise, nutrition, uh, how they groom themselves, things like that. So yeah, yeah, I like Mr. Outlaw. I like Mr. Outlaw a lot. Like he was, um, alternate reality was alternate reality and the secret prison were two of like the last series that I legitimately enjoyed and really followed every single piece to the end. um, I liked alternate reality uh, a lot better just because it's a more progressive story. Like it actually had more drama and characteristics to it that are more indicative of like solid storytelling, whereas government prison was or government facility was kind of a fun like guilty pleasure, exciting story. But yeah, I like Mr. Outlaw's stuff. Yeah, it was those were two that really stuck out to me. Because it's very rare now because everybody wants to do series, but I don't think they do them for the right reasons. I think they're trying to build an audience, trying to get famous and get a bunch of recognition, and they think that doing the series is what's going to do that. And I don't think that's the way to it. I think it's, doing a series is a lot harder than doing a single one-off story. And that's why a lot of them fizzle out is because they just go, I want to do a series, and they start the series and they have no idea how it's going to end, and then it just breaks apart and they write themselves into corners and crap. And there's a dime a dozen of those that are happening right now. But yeah, you're not going to get Relic versus like that. That's part of his character. Is Relic is through and through a pacifist. He does not fight. You don't see him fight. Uh, like that's part of his character. Like that's he does not fight. He doesn't do violence. Like I said, the closest thing you see him do to violence is him threatening an ogre with being out in space, and he wouldn't actually leave him in the sun or anything like that. He was just like getting a point across to make him leave Jose alone. But yeah, Relic is the antithesis of a versus character. Um, now, uh, his brother Jingles is completely different story. He's the antithesis of Relic, but he doesn't tend to leave the hotel. So yeah, you get kind of different stuff like that. But there's there's varying tiers there. But yeah, you're not going to see Relic versus anybody. He does not fight. He's a complete pacifist. Tales from the gas station. Uh, Tales from the Gas Station. I've listened to some of the main series, um, but like in all honesty, the one I enjoyed more than anything was Finding Vanessa, which is set in that universe, but I think it's a different author. Um, but I like Finding Vanessa a lot better than I do the actual main Tales from the Gas Station story. I thought it told a better story than the largely episodic nature of Tales from the Gas Station. Um, I really like I've listened to Finding Vanessa several times. I really enjoy that story. It was really good. Um, then like there's a few series that stand out in my mind, and Finding Vanessa is one of them. And then I Dared My Best Friend to Ruin My Life is another excellent creepypasta series. That like no supernatural anything, no just really good storytelling. That I absolutely love. Like Baraska, another great example. No supernatural anything, just uh, great storytelling, and it's one of the best creepypasta series that have ever been written. Uh, so yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, yeah. Like that's kind of what I like about his characters, and Jose. That's why they tend to get along so well. Is they just want to be left to their own devices, watch their movies, kick back, eat their food, and be left alone. Like that I tend to like base those characters off of like emotions I feel strongly of at any given point. Like the protagonist from Werewolves Are Assholes is that you want to correct people when they say something about you that's wrong, or you want to argue with them about something, or you want to be right, or you don't like them saying anything bad about you. Like that chip that exists on all of our shoulders is basically the protagonist of Werewolves Are Assholes. And then Travis is like that selfish compulsion. It's like looking out, trying to look out for ourselves all the time. Like screw you, I need to take care of me at the moment. Um, and Jose is like that. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to sit down with a snack and my favorite show and be left alone. And that just kind of that absolute go with the flow. Just let me be for a little while and enjoy the things I want to enjoy. Like that's the core of Jose right there. And then uh, you have those different aspects that I think we all feel to some degree. But it's just when I think of those things, like those are the characters that come to mind. Is this person with a huge chip on her shoulder all the time that's a product of what she's experienced and all the bad things that have happened to her. And you have this guy who's so selfish that he's always running from the consequences of his own actions. And then you have the other one who's not selfish to the point where all he wants is just a little time to himself to be alone with the things he likes to do. But he's always dragging himself into helping somebody else, even though all he wants is to just relax and be by himself for a little while. So yeah, and then he meets Relic, who's basically the cosmic entity version of that, who just likes to chill by himself and watch movies and eat junk food. And I don't think there's a person who doesn't relate to that in some way. Which like I said, that's Relic. Is he's a universal cosmic entity, but at the end of the day, all he wants to do is watch movies and eat junk food. Okay, so okay, there's two of them. Well, yeah, that's. I think they both operate kind of off the same thing, where Milo doesn't mind being in everybody's business. Like you could tell, he's much more uh, extroverted. Like you see that process kind of happening through I Banged a Werewolf, where he's kind of like, withdrawn and into himself. He's coming out of a depression where his granddad dies, and then he kind of meets the spark of a person in Tegan and kind of draws him back out to like really let his personality blossom. Because I kind of went through something like that when I was a kid, when I started doing the Wild West shows. Is that helped me get used to being in front of people and expressing myself, and where I didn't used to like being on stage or being in front of people, and I found that one thing that like helped me get past that. And Milo kind of does that, where they both realize the utility in being underestimated versus being overestimated is but at the same time I think it's with Milo it's more a sense of strategy, is he knows that if people underestimate him, it's advantageous and he can use that. Whereas with Jose, he knows that if people know he's smart, they'll try and ask him to do stuff. So it tends to be the difference in motivations there that you know influence what they're doing. Yeah. Well, I don't know. It depends on like what you were expecting with Baraska. Is because like there were people disappearing. You have this strange, unexplained metallic sound around the this constant thing, and it depends on how much you pay attention to the build up. And look at, like I said, the small details will make it make more sense uh, as the story goes. Um, because I do the same thing. I write stories in such a way that if you don't pay attention to the small things, by the time you get to the bigger things, they won't make as much sense. So yeah, if you go back, like I said, if you go back and really follow through, because it might be a shock at first, but that should be something that motivates you to go back and re-examine the whole story and look for the small details that help you figure it out through the end. Uh, because that can be, you know, it stories are like they can't dictate how you'll take them, but you can always go, well, maybe there's something I missed, maybe there's something I didn't think of, things like that. Because that's if I ever get a weird feeling about a story, I'll go back and listen to it again, maybe a couple more times. I can't remember what the movie was, but there was such a weird thing at the end of it. It came out a few years ago. It might have been a 2020 video about like a shapeshifter or a witch or something. And the ending was so jarring and weird. I tracked down the people who wrote that movie to ask them about the ending of it. Like, and it wasn't a small movie; it was a hard task. But I wanted to be sure of the ending to see if there was something I was missing. So I tracked down the actual writer of that movie to ask them, "Am I missing something? What happened here? What's going on?" So it's whenever something's like that's jarring, it can be like I said, there can be a reason, like in the story, like something was done wrong or poorly or something. But a lot of times it can be that we missed something or didn't understand something or overlooked something. Uh, so Borrasca is definitely, I'd say, go back and check it out again. And like with the scope of knowing how it ends, go back and now look at the details, and it'll probably make a lot more sense now. Like certain things that characters will do, certain uh, peculiarities about them will probably make a lot more sense. Like I said, because you look at the little things that some of the characters do, like the dad, it will make a lot more sense uh, than like the weird things that he does throughout the course of the story, and how he manages to show up at certain places at certain times and know certain things will make a lot more sense throughout the scope of that. Knowing the ending, and it'll probably be easier to connect all those things later on. But yeah, it's an extremely well written story. So that's it's very, but it's long. It's very long as far as stories go. So it's easy to like get those lost in the fog of how much story there is. Because I'll do that sometimes. Uh, and I'll be talking about, and then somebody will point out, well, no, this person said this, and I realize I completely missed that part and have to go back. Like, oh, well, yeah, now it actually makes sense. So, like, knowing how it ends, it's worth going back and re-listening to and watching the characters' actions through the lens of knowing how the story ends. And but yeah, so yeah, okay, yeah, we're at like 3 hours now, and I think we've gotten through all the writing stuff. But that's what's going on right now. Is I've got the coin thing going on. Got the first coin thing. I'm going to be doing a lot more on Patreon, uh, and we're going to be plugging it. I'm playing with the idea of actually having like a small sponsor thing for the videos. Not like here's this long ad, but like this video is sponsored by, and then that's the end of it. Uh, to see how that goes. If I can find people for that, that'd be pretty cool. Because I don't like intrusive stuff. I would rather, hey, this video is sponsored by this, and then they leave you the hell alone and let you watch the video. So you know that the company sponsored it, the product exists, you can look it up if you want, and then there's no further interruption in the video. Like it would take you longer to flip the phone over and find the skip button and hit it than it would to just let it play through. Because that's, you know, I'm very concerned about how the viewing or the listening experience is. So I wouldn't be like, you know, hey, you want to sponsor this, and then they go, okay, yeah, you need a 1 minute thing, and you have to say these 5 different. No, that's never going to happen. You're never going to see that. But like, just like this video is sponsored by, you know, uh, uh, Carnivore Tools or Volpe's Training or something like that, and then the video continues and you never hear from them again. The rest of the story, that would be a different thing. So that's an interesting thing that I was thinking of. Uh, so yeah, we're doing the coin thing. We're doing the hooks crew thing. So if you do that and you're there for 3 months, you get a Spanish dollar from Spain. You're in the crew. You get a letter of induction from the captain. And get that going, and we'll be doing a lot of other stuff on there. And then we're doing the book, so that'll be ready probably mid-September. So you guys finally get a Worst First book, and like I said, hopefully, once we start plugging the Patreon crap like that, and the book goes up, and we start doing stuff like that, I'll be able to write more frequently, because I'll have more time to do that. So hopefully that goes well, and then we can uh, start, you know, really putting stuff out, because there's so many things that like I have so many ideas and stuff that I just never get to write because I have to abandon them for the other stuff that people are looking forward to or that I've already established or that I'm already working on. And uh, it's not a lack of ideas, it's a lack of time, I assure you. Uh, so we got all that stuff going on. Oh, and I've got new graphics for shirts that are going to be coming out as soon as the part one, not part zero, not Jose's Day Off, but part one of uh, End of the Road drops. Uh, I'm wearing one of them right now. And then I've got one of them that's the worst first shirt, the most popular one that is the worst first word, but it's got Abigail in her like traditional clothes, like sitting on the logo. So that will be like coming up when the uh, the new season hits part one. So stuff like that. And then there's a new one. Oh yeah, God, that's rough. I've been homeless. It sucks. Um, I don't wish that on anybody. Uh, like it's yeah, it absolutely sucks. And that's actually how where Monsters Play starts. Is this guy who's about to lose his house and just desperate for a job, and like I mean, just really in the pit of things. Like that's what he's worried about. Is he's sitting there thinking about what's it going to be like to be homeless, and then that story starts. Uh, so that one, you'll probably enjoy that one from that perspective. Uh, but yeah, and, but yeah, God, it seems so long ago now. At the same time, it doesn't seem that long. Like it's weird. Like I thought that these stories would be like a year long thing, and then we move on to the next series of stories. And here we are 5 years later, and I still haven't got to that last arc yet. So, yeah, that's been an interesting thing. Uh, there we go. Whatever. Um, yeah, when it comes to Abigail, it's one of those things where uh, the fact that you want her to is what makes it enjoyable in the story. Because once she ever does, then the appeal of it as a mechanism in the story loses effect. So you lose that whole plot thing. Is if it's always just right there, then it's a fun story element. And then once it happens, then you're happy for a few minutes, like yay, she got. And then the whole enjoy the entertainment aspect of watching her try to is gone, and you don't have that element anymore, and the fun of her pursuing it uh, goes away. But there's stuff in this coming season in End of the Road where you see her making like little efforts with Louis, like trying at least, uh, because you're watching it from a new perspective. You're watching it from the perspective of like Jose, uh, who's seeing this rather than from Louis' perspective, where he's describing it. So you're seeing like from the outside looking in how these two interact rather than from Louis' perspective. Uh, so it's you get to see that, but there's different things like that going on in this season too. Yeah. Um, like I said, that a lot of that stuff is dependent on time because generally, like I draw a lot of stuff, not just worse verse art. So when I do, I'll tend to post like, well, I've got some stuff that I still haven't even posted yet. I've just been sitting out waiting for the right opportunity. It's just been like collecting electrons on my phone. But uh, like I said, it's the more time I have, the more time I have to produce worse verse related content. Like that's it's all dependent on the time I have to devote to it. Because if I want to draw something that's not worse verse art, then I'm going to draw that because that's what I feel like drawing at the time. Whereas if I'm getting enough money to pay my rent, which I don't have a very bad rent, like I actually have very cheap rent, but if I was getting enough money from the Patreon to pay my rent, then I would be motivated to focus on worse verse stuff. So you would get more like that. That's the nature of it. It's incentivization. Is you know I could draw this that I want to, or I could draw worse verse art that these people are paying me to create content for. So that's how you have to kind of weigh that in there. Well, I like it seems that way, but at the same time, like to some degree, like you have to understand her whole history and like how something happening to somebody like that at like the cusp of 13 years old affects how they approach not just romantic relationships but like friendships and everything altogether. Like you have to remember that Abigail is a deeply deeply traumatized person beyond anything any regular human could possibly relate to, understand, begin to comprehend. Is the fact that she is as functional as she is nothing short of miraculous. Like there is no person more traumatized than her that you'll meet in the worst verse. And she, considering that, like I said, she has a very violent history. Like that's the bulk of her formative years of interaction is through horrible acts of violence inflicted against her. So that's how she sees a lot of like you know relationships with people is through violence, through acts of violence. And the like I said, like Relic mentions, at any point she could mutilate Jose beyond the point of recognition in the flash of an eye, but she doesn't. It's more like an affectionate thing where she kind of sees him as a friend, and she does that in jest, but also she can flip a tank with one hand. So there's that overlap of this extremely strong person who has this incredibly traumatic past informed largely by interpersonal violence, who doesn't understand how to form a functioning friendship like she needs to at the same time. Like, it's how Abigail expresses herself, basically. Um, like I said, when she first meets him and punches him in the stomach, like she could have punched a hole through him and into the wall behind him, but she didn't. So, like, it's almost like a kindness, like her being kind is not absolutely mutilating him at every point. So you have to like understand how she kind of, yeah, like you would see kids on the playground, like pulling a girl's hair that you like, or a girl pushing you over because she has a crush on you or something, or like just two friends that like hit each other in the arm, you know like it's the same thing, but also she's got superhuman strength and a very very poor understanding of social interaction, and a deeply deeply traumatized mind and a personality that's built around that. uh, so like I say, you have to allow for that. Like it's not entirely her fault in the sense of like what she experienced for the a course of 70 plus years of her life in a type of trauma that no human could actually ever experience. Uh, it's I think she does surprisingly well, all things considered. Well, that yeah, I was talking about that earlier. I'm not a comic person. I've never been super into it. Like I have a few comic books, and there's a few that I like to read, but for the most part, I like manga. Uh, like that's always appealed to me, like the stylization of that. Now, like I say, if I could find somebody who's willing to do that, like a more manga esque adaptation, then yeah, 100%. Like I will be like completely forthright. I'm not a strong enough artist to do a manga like that on my own. Like I can draw, but you have to be able to draw well and draw quickly to make anything like that viable. Because like with comics, that's not drawn by one person. That's you have a primary artist, the sketch artist, who draws the basic scene. You have an inker who goes over and does all the black. They put all the black stuff in there and do the lines and all the dark parts. And then you have the color who goes in there and does the coloring and the shading and things like that. So you have a team of people working on each of these things. Like it's just me and all this art that you see me doing. That's on my phone. I do that on this cell phone. Like that's what I have to do art with. Um, so I'm neither equipped for it. I'm not skilled enough. I don't like, and these things take teams of people. Um, and at the same time, I'm not guaranteed a return on that work. I would need a company to where they're like, hey, we want to adapt this rather than me trying to do it by myself, because I do still have bills. Like I don't like I said, as two people here who have been homeless and me as well, that's not something I want to do again. So push comes to shove, when it comes to me continuing to write stories or being homeless, I'm gonna choose the roof over my head. So that's just how the cookie crumbles there. Well, it's okay. So no, it's uh, Abigail's just like I said. She's been around for a while, and like I said, she has a fundamental kindness to her that, uh, like, like I said, she tends to typically, like I said, if you removed the vampire portion, she would be an extremely kind and loving and affectionate person. So it kind of like her having that base level of like an extreme benevolent kindness is kind of what helps her to not want to hurt people as far as being a vampire goes, which is what helped her be that first person to kind of overcome that hurdle. Um, so she kind of helped build that system to help other people who can. And like I said, that's not a one to one. Like not everybody will be able to. Not everybody has the capacity to like override that innate urge to like feed on other humans. So it's like like sociopathy or psychopathy or anything like that. Like some people can be helped, some people you just have to remove from society, and that tends to be what the vampires have. But yeah, it's just her being around so long and being isolated like she did is what gave it like the two pieces of the really high end art that I did for the Patreon is like when she was in captivity and when she escaped is she was in there for a long time, and that's where she had time to like develop and think through and figure out what was going on in her body and how to mess with those metallic particles that make her much stronger than like the average. But at the same time, part of that, what lets her do that, is her mental faculty, her ability to mentally resist the pain of what being that strong does to her body, because every time she does something like that, it's ripping her muscles apart at like a molecular level. Like these metals are woven into her like cell by cell. So when she does that, it's these metals do it. It's not her muscle doing it. She doesn't have the muscular capacity to throw a ball at 1,700 miles an hour. It's the metals doing it. And when they do that, they're doing a lot of horrible things to the muscle fibers. So that causes an unimaginable amount of pain. And her ability to consciously like override that and push through it is what lets her do that and kind of go to that next level to be able to do stuff like that is her adaptation to pain from what she experienced in those like 70 plus years when she was captive, is she became mentally resistant to the conscious effects of pain to where she doesn't have to consider what she's doing to her body as much through the effects of that pain. Because like an average vampire, they're strong, but once they reach a certain point, that pain begins to motivate them to throttle it back so they don't you know do what they can potentially do. Whereas her, she doesn't care. She'll go 100% and let the healing do its thing, and then just not mind that she's in excruciating pain when she's doing it, because she just doesn't even process it at like a conscious level anymore. So that tends to be how she's able to be that strong. But at the same time, the reason she's able to not run around like eating people in alleyways is because before she was a vampire, she was a very extremely kind and gentle and loving person, and that just like helped balance that out with that kind of like a sociopathic nature that happens when you are turned into a vampire. So she kind of, it's like a base level kind of thing, a base level kindness that kind of like drug down that vampire sociopathy kind of thing that helped her be the first one to kind of really figure that out and overcome that hurdle. Oh yeah, I don't care. When it comes to like fan art and stuff, I've gotten a few things that, and yeah, I have them all saved. I save every piece of fan art uh, that I see. Um, yeah, it's no big deal. That's awesome. Like I tell people the same thing when people ask to like write a worst first story. I'm like, as long as you consider it fan fiction, I don't care. You can do whatever you want. I'm very much a free speech absolutist. Um, so that implies freedom of expression absolutist too. Uh, it's just like if you want to induct it into a canonical story, there's this huge list of requirements that I have. Like I never tell people no. I'm like, here's just a monster wall of requirements if you want a canonical, or you want to write a canonical worst verse story. Um, so yeah, like anything, like I said, and I don't really like the word fan. Like it feels weird to me, like weird to acknowledge it. when it comes to like fan art or fan fiction, quote unquote, yeah, it's cool. Like I tell people, do whatever you want. It's like I said, I wouldn't be a free speech absolutist if I said I had a problem with it. And I've saved every single bit of it I've ever found. Like I was just scrolling through art one day on I can't remember what website it was, and came across it and wasn't even looking for it, and saved it to my phone because I thought it was cool. Um, so yeah, like I think that's really cool. Like that's something, again, another thing I never expected to see when I started writing these stories. So that's always like, really exciting and cool to me to see. Um, but yeah, it's not something I tell people to not do. Like I'm not Elon Musk. I'm an actual free speech absolutist. Uh, so like I said, that loops around to freedom of expression. So I tell people, like, you can draw, you can write, whatever you want about whatever character you want, doing whatever you want. Like that's entirely up to you. Like that's your prerogative. Like I can't stop you, and I'm not gonna stop you. That's that's your right as a human being to express yourself freely as you see fit. And if you want to express yourself through fan art of any given story, then yeah, that's entirely up to you. That's just how that goes with me. For a words for a story, so you have to have a basic. You have to be, if you don't already, you have to be able to go through a basic primer for biology, taxonomy, phylogeny, geology, um, quantum mechanics, uh, organometallic chemistry, all the things that influence what happens in the story. Um, you have to know the history of the story, like every interwoven history of the story. You have to know everything that's planned already, so nothing affects or contradicts with what's going on. Nothing creates a plot hole there. All the history backstory of individual characters, individual locations, what's going on with them. Uh, Writing quality requirements, like uh, beyond all that, like I have to be able to look and be like, you're at a certain level of competency with writing. Like you can tell a narrative, you can write without making plot holes. You can write a cohesive story. You can make things fit. You can tell a story from beginning to end. Uh, that makes sense, that follows from the beginning, uh, that is easy to read, easy to understand, various things like that. That because that's one thing is people like they'll come to you and be like, hey, I want to write a words for a story, and they expect you to make a yes or no decision, and you're like, I haven't even seen what you write at all. Like I don't even know if you can. Like it's I encourage people to write, but at the same time, when you want to take on somebody else's story, something that they built, without even showing them like what you can do, what you've written, that's a completely different, like that's a big ask. It's like I don't have any reference for what you could do, because it's not like a narrator where they read your story and then they ask you, hey, can I narrate this? They know what they're getting into. But somebody walking up to you and going, hey, can I write a story in your series, having not shown you that I can write, or that I know where the story is going to go, or that I know how the universe operates on a fundamental level. Because I spent weeks and weeks and weeks, like kind of like building up this base level system of these three particles, like going, how do you make the paranormal work? Like, what's the base level of bullshit you need to include into this to where the paranormal is functional? Like, what do we not have? Like, that if we had it, these things would be possible. And I came down to, these three particles to do these three very distinct things, and worked from there. And how do you have these paranormal communities that actually exist, but we don't see and that we can't account for, and going through all this and put through all these different things, and like, how do we get these certain animals? Like there's phylogeny behind, like, and how werewolves work, like how they have nothing to do with wolves, like that Dr. Jekyll explains. Like that was determined from the start when I first wrote the very first Werewolves Are Assholes, is werewolves have nothing to do with wolves. That's just a name. And then you can show, like Dr. Jekyll shows the people in Werewolves Are Assholes, like how you can get a werewolf from a human realistically with our existing DNA. And so different stuff like that has to be able, like they have to be able to draw from that in an instant to where there's nothing contradictory about the existing universe or where it will be going later on. But now art, like fan art, is just fan art. Like we're talking about like writing a story. Um, like I don't know how you would make art canon. Like art would just be taking a character and drawing them in some way. Uh, but like to actually write a part of the story, that would be a completely different thing. But I mean, just to draw something, like I don't make any requirements. Like people just draw whatever they want, however they want. Like that doesn't affect the story in any way. But when you get people who come to you and ask how, like what like can I write a Wordpress story, I'm like, well, we need to have a long conversation about that first. And to this day, I haven't had anybody take me up on that. So I mean, there's a lot that goes into it that people tend to not want to go through to write it. But I try to tell them, like, if you have an idea that would be good in the Wordpress, then you have an idea that would be good by itself, and you shouldn't waste it on me. Like you should be building your own. You can build your own universe and do this yourself. Like that, I want to encourage people to write. Like just because you're not writing a Wordpress story doesn't mean you don't still have a good idea. Just because magic has never been a good excuse to me. Like I wanted something that can be scientifically feasible down to a very fundamental level and track from the micro to the macro and make sense. Uh, and that's because I'm very anal and neurotic and obsessive about that stuff. And a lot of people don't want to write under those conditions. So I'm like, this is what you're going to be dealing with if you really want to pursue this. And so far everybody's like, no, that seems like a giant colossal nightmare. And so I don't fault them for that. But I also try to encourage them and tell them that if you have a good idea, the good idea remains whether it's a worse for a story or not. You don't need me to do that. And I think that's what some of them are doing is they want to go into and write a worse for a story to piggyback off of whatever little following it has to try and elevate themselves, you know, by skipping that step of building anything up, whereas that was never my intention, and that just happened incidentally. Because I've always told people, is like, I'm not writing this for you, I'm writing this for me. If you happen to write it, that's awesome, but if you don't, I'm still going to write it. And people just happen to like it, whereas and now there's a group of people that follow the stories, and that's awesome, but that was never what I intended to do. It was just me writing stories, and that happened incidentally. Whereas for most people, it seems that tends to be the sole motivation is right to build a following, and that's just something that's never been a main motivation of mine. So I try and scare them out of that with all those requirements. Well, yeah, well, like I said, it's you're free to interpret that. Like I said, I have my art that I post of them, but like I said, you're free to interpret characters however you want. Like I don't care. Like if somebody wants to write or draw them as black, I don't care. Like cool. Like they're not necessarily that way because like that's the whole point of Jose being Jose, but being ridiculously white. But if you want to see how they look, who cares? Like do what you want. But it's you're free to do things however you want. Like that's the cool thing about art. There's no rules. But like if somebody comes to me and goes, "Hey, I want to draw them as accurately as possible. Can you describe them to me?" Then yeah, I'm going to give them the exact details I have in my head. But like I said, at the same time, you can imagine somebody completely different. Like the whole Harry Potter thing. Like I imagine Dumbledore as the first actor throughout all the book series. Like he always looked like that to me, even though they changed the actor and the. but I always had that one image in my head, and it never went away. So but yeah, it's when it comes to the protagonists, like I said, because I have red hair, I don't want to make any of them have red hair. I don't want them to seem too much like me in any real way. Uh, I want to write people who are different from me. Uh, so, like, the reason Hephaestus has red hair is because, you know, in the mythology, he tends to have red hair. So that's why I wrote him with red hair. But when it comes to it, I don't want to, like, just write characters with red hair uh, when they're the protagonist or something, because I don't want it to seem like I'm that character in any capacity. But, and what was that other thing? Are all your stories? Not all of them. Uh, like very few of them though. Very few of them. Like the ones that I was talking about earlier, like retirement and aliens. Those aren't part of the worst verse. In the woods somewhere isn't a worst verse story. I never recovered isn't a worst verse story. Like, comment, subscribe isn't a worst verse story. I don't consider Complex to be a worst verse story because I tell people it doesn't happen in the worst verse, even though there's a character that's in the worst verse stories. It it, it it makes more sense why I don't call it a worst verse story, because it doesn't happen in the worst verse. Later on, as you come to understand like what really happened there, because the bulk of the story doesn't take place in the worst verse. It takes place in a universe outside of the worst verse. Uh, that doesn't center around the worst hotel, even though it's another fictional universe. So I tell people it's relevant to the worst verse stories, but it doesn't happen in the worst verse. Um, so there's stuff like that. So you can either take that as one or the other, or both. But yeah, like in the woods somewhere doesn't happen isn't a worst verse story. Uh, Eridanus is, and its tie-in is harder to spot than some of the others, but it is a worse for a story if you know how to look at it and connect the dots. Um, but yeah, most of them are. Most of them tend to be. Uh, and a lot, like I said, a lot of the ones that I wrote that aren't worse for stories just never got posted because the worse for stories are what people tend to be more interested in. And I have to write the series and finish the series, and those get pushed to the side most of the time. Yeah, well, yeah, but at the same time, I'm writing these stories for uh, primarily for narration and literature. Like, it would be very important if it was a manga or a comic or something that I was doing where the art was a significant thing. But uh, there's like 1,000 people on the subreddit uh, that see that art versus the tens of thousands who know these stories exclusively through the narrations. So a lot of these people, they'll have a completely different visual representation of Jose than like what the art you've seen on the Reddit will be. They'll look completely different because that's the only visual they have is what they've imagined in their head. Uh, whereas, like I said, I'm not telling a visual story. I'm telling a literary story that's told exclusively through text most of the time. Where the art would become considerably more important if it was like a graphic novel of some kind, be it a comic or an actual thick graphic novel or a manga or any type of thing like that, um, or even a story with a few illustrations. But yeah, the art is important if the story if art is a key component of the story, where most of the stuff is just me drawing what I have in my mind at any given time. Uh, so it's not super relevant to it. Like I said, the majority of the people who consume these stories do it on YouTube, who never see visuals uh, in any real capacity, which is going to be different this season. Like I said, because I'm doing original thumbnail art for every video. So some of them are going to feature characters. Like the first thumbnail has Jose like in the distance in the aperture of the picture, but the second one has like a close up of the maid, like right at, like as she's described standing at his door when he opens it. So you have those. You know, you're going to have visual representations of the character directly from me in the thumbnails this go round. So that's going to change up a little bit. But for the most part, there hasn't been any visual cues. It's all been uh, completely text based. So that's all that they've had to uh, go off of is whatever they concoct in their imagination, however detailed of a description I give them in that time. But at the same time, that has its own merit. Is you let their imagination do the work, it lets the story flow a lot better when it comes to things like that. Is knowing how to convey a plot without bogging it down in detail, because that's always a big thing I've had that's kept me away from reading Stephen King books a lot of the time. Is if you cut out the needless exposition, you would have a third of the original book, and it's it's always been one of my big things that kept me away from Stephen King is all of that. He won't leave anything to the imagination. Everything has to be described in vivid detail all the time. And I'm the complete opposite. Like, I'll let big things go to the imagination if it's not vital to the story, and to keep the flow going and the pace moving along the way I want it to. But yeah, where are we? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're like 3.5 hours. But yeah, I think we covered everything I wanted to get through. So pushing the Patreon, doing the book, going to be ready about mid-September. Uh, Hopefully, I'll have more time to write, do more stuff. And I've got, like I said, the season's ready. It's coming. It's down the pipe. So I'm doing the one a week thing this time, and more consistently. So we'll be doing that. So look around another week or so, and I do that because I don't want that story to dominate the channel. I want other people to have their stories on there and get narrated. So I don't want just a constant wave of Cerber stuff or whatever series it happens to be. I want it spaced out to where people can get their. If people don't follow the series, they can get through and have other stuff throughout the course of the week that isn't, whatever I'm doing at the time. So we'll be doing one a week ish. Like I said, it might be wider than that since these stories are going to be kind of long, and he might have to take extra time to narrate one of those from time to time. But that's basically what's going on. And if you guys want, I'll start doing, like I said, if you're writing or narrator or anything like that, I'll start trying to do these more regularly to, kind of let you figure out how I do whatever it is you particularly like about what I do, and maybe it'll help me figure more out about what I do in some capacity. But that's basically what's going on, and you'll be seeing me doing that later on in the. I can't say this. But yeah, so yeah, we're gonna be doing that this season. So we're gonna be plugging Patreon, and like I said, if we get more patrons, subscribers, then I'll be able to write more consistently, and not have to put as many things on the back burner. Uh, and I'll be able to write faster. I'll be able to move through a series and get on to the next one a lot quicker. So hopefully that plays out. But yeah, we'll try to have the book ready. Or the first book, I should say, we'll have Winter Camp ready around mid-September, because I'll have time to screw around. Uh, um, same. They're I think all of this. There's a guy doing this in Indonesian who came to me like a couple of years ago, and asked me about it. Uh, so I told him he could, and he didn't have to ask anything after that. I haven't had anybody ask about it in Spanish, um, but uh, yeah, there is a guy who's doing it in Indonesian. I don't know what his channel is or anything, but yeah, he's translating them uh, and narrating them in Indonesian. So that's I know that one's happening. I know all of these are getting narrated in Indonesian somewhere. So I could be famous in Indonesia. Like they could be 100 times more popular in Indonesia than they are here. Who knows? But yeah, that's what's been going on lately. So that's basically the whole thing. So I I've still got to cook dinner, and it is 10:45. So I'm going to bring this one to a close. Those are the announcements. You'll see them on the Reddit later on, probably like a couple of days from now. But that's what's been going on. We're gonna, like I said, I'm gonna get winter camp ready by mid September, and then I'm gonna try and do the rest of the series. Have their own individual volumes. Uh, Cerber's going to be expensive. I can tell you right now, it's going to be a big book. There's a lot to it. It's longer than Dracula. It's longer than the original Dracula novel, which is a long book. Um, so it's and that's all the ones I currently, and I still got 2 parts that I have to add to the actual book to see what the total word count is, and those are going to be long parts. So it's not even completely in the software that's turning it to a PDF for the book, and it's longer than Dracula. So we're gonna have that, but it's gonna be there if people want it. So I'm gonna do it for Werewolves or Assholes, Worst Hotel, the side stories, Cerber, all that junk. Then hopefully get around to actually finishing Magenta Valley at some point. I'm gonna work on that while we're going through End of the Road, and try and get caught up on that. Get some progress made on that because I've got pretty much all of End of the Road finished. Um, and I can burn that time away because that's going to be 15 solid weeks of not having to write that series. So that's basically what's going on. Like I said, the Patreon, if you end up joining the $20 tier and doing the Hooks Crew thing, I've got these things we're doing with the Spanish dollar from Spain that you get after 3 months. So that's kind of a cool thing that I thought of. Uh, and then we're gonna try and do more exclusive content. I'm gonna try and get hire Scott on to do an audio book for Winter Camp and keep moving through that stuff. So that's all the new stuff that's going on. Anybody that was looking for writing advice, I hope I answered that with whatever you were looking for. Yeah, thanks for listening. Yeah, just the response helped me through a very dark time in my life. Just the first few stories, the response I got, because I wasn't expecting much out of it, or even them to get narrated. I just posted them, and that helped me out in a very bad time in my life. So you guys make a difference too, in your own way. And think think we're gonna wrap that up. So that's everything that's going on. So be looking out in the next week or so for the official start of the uh, End of the Road series. And like I said, most of the updates will be on the Reddit. Like I said, this is just I had a lot of people lately in my messages asking me about how to do certain things writing. So I figured this would be a good way to cover all that and then have it documented in this damn almost 4 hour long video if they want to come back and find the certain spots. But yeah, that's basically all that I had to cover here tonight. So I'm going to end this and finally make my supper, and we'll try and get this thing underway in this next week or so, and I'll have the book ready and posted on the Reddit when it is done around middle September. So that's something to look forward to. It's finally a worst first book that's uh, available for purchase, even if I had to do it myself. So yeah, all right, I will see you guys later, and I am going to make me some spaghetti.